You're watching Medfield TV.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the September 3rd Medfield Board of Selectmen's meeting. A reminder to everyone that the proceedings here are being recorded to go out on Medfield TV. So if there's anyone from the audience that wants to talk, please identify yourself and your address. This evening, in addition to the Board of Selectmen, we have the State Hospital Development Committee, as well as members from the State Hospital Master Planning Committee, some interested citizens who've easily done as much rowing of the boat in the effort to redevelop the state hospital as anyone. Kathy McCabe, our consultant to help us move forward with the development of the state hospital property, is here with Sarah Raposa.
And the planning board also.
And the planning board.
Over in
and
the
planning
corner.
board. There you are. And the planning board. So this joint meeting is primarily focused on helping us come to a common understanding of how we want to move ahead at this point in time in preparing for a special town meeting that we anticipate will be asking the taxpayers to vote to approve the zoning changes that would be required to enable us to move ahead with the implementation of the state hospital master plan. So with that, let me first, and I skipped one thing, if we could just take a moment to, out of consideration for those service members who are serving the military across the globe. Thank you. With that, I think we can go ahead and start with the presentation, Sarah.
Okay, sure. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction, just to say that it's great to see everybody in the same room together again. It's been a year since the Master Planning Committee delivered the plan to the Board of Selectmen. So you've had a little bit of a break, but you've also had some nice acknowledgements over the course of the year on the planning process, the community input that was involved in the master plan. I've also been working with the development committee, so some highlights that they have done over the past year are put out an RFI, which was meant to test the master plan, the development potential of the master plan. So I worked with Todd and Johnny over there at the Blue Cards, and well, there were 5 responses. All were enthusiastic. 3 of the 5 did agree that the plan was implementable. And more recently, the development committee has been working on procuring consultants to do water sewer investigations and also remediation and demolition investigations, and both to help evaluate the town's position with the financial model, whether or not the multiple scenarios are feasible, including whether or not if the plan is, the town's position, whether or not the plan is implemented or if it is not. Based on development input, the development committee also recommended a 2-part process for special town meeting. One would be the zoning adoption. And if passed, they would work on an RFQ and P process, and that would come to another special town meeting for disposition authorization. And the point there is that the development community would like some certainty that the town is serious about implementing the plan before they respond to an RFP. One developer told us it costs several $100,000 to respond to a proposal of this magnitude. So as Gus said, tonight's meeting is focused on the draft zoning bylaw that was included in the master plan and getting to special town meeting. We've had a couple of joint meetings in the past, but sometimes they've been a little bit derailed by other scenarios. Kathy's working under a new contract. It's focused on zoning. It is meant to get to special town meeting. So we're not rehashing the plan, we're not rehashing the process, or coming up with different scenarios tonight. Kathy's scope includes this joint meeting, materials for the planning board's public hearing, which is a required part of the process, a presentation, a handout, and attendance at special town meeting. Everybody here was invited because we all play really significant roles in the process in getting to town meeting. I want to be as helpful as possible and supportive during this process. So having an explicit understanding of timing, schedules, identifying responsible parties for education, outreach, article sponsors and proponents, and any other policy directive is really beneficial for me to help me do my job better. So I just want to reintroduce you to Kathy McCabe and Jen Mecca.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'll just proceed if that's okay. So what I'd like to do is kind of set up the discussion, which is a little bit of a review, but our task is really how do we organize and get all of us, because we all have a role to play on moving things forward towards special town meeting. So, and as was distributed in terms of this section of the agenda, the Selectmen's Meeting, and I know many of the boards also posted their own agendas. We're going to kind of do intros and call it order, which we just did. I'm going to kind of comment on doing a recap and refresher about zoning, looking at the rezoning process and time frame. We want to talk about who's going to be the project proponent and what needs to be done. Public outreach, which is essential to any zoning article getting enacted with a 2/3 vote at town meeting, and then kind of review what we need to do and, you know, work on what's our homework and when are we going to do it by. So it's really kind of a presentation at the beginning to frame our discussion, and then kind of really a working meeting, time to roll up your sleeves, and we're all going to jump in. It's after Labor Day, so time to kind of dig in. So on the overview and recap, I thought it might be helpful just to take a brief, long view on where you've been and where we are today. So really the story about the Medfield State Hospital started a century ago, but more recently this chapter really started in 2003 when the hospital officially closed and last patient was sent over to Taunton. And even though you knew about it a couple of years before, in 2005, DCAM had a redevelopment plan that the town really said no way, where they proposed 440 housing units. And I think that really kind of galvanized Medfield to not only rejecting it, looking at the density and wanting to really have Medfield's vision and really kind of get a handle on what Medfield wanted for the state hospital. And there were various steps in between 2006 and 2014, and I know Bill and John were very instrumental in helping on some of the negotiation with DCAM regarding remediation and cleanup. But, you know, there was a lot of back and forth with DCAM during that period. And I think there was some real steps forward in terms of getting some of the cleanup commitments that you really wanted. And that was needed. In 2014, town meeting voted to authorize purchasing of the state hospital. That was the same year when you had special legislation enacted at the State House to allow you to purchase the water tower site. So 2014 was your really date of acquisition of all the state hospital parcels for the town. Then in the subsequent several years, the State Hospital Committee worked, was appointed by the Board of Selectmen and worked and got public input. You employed consultants. You really did your homework and you developed a plan that was Medfield's vision and reflected Medfield's values. And that plan, you released it in 2018, and also as Sarah pointed out, the development committee was appointed by the select board and charged in 2018. And that in 2018, 2019, the development committee tested the plan and got some market feedback from developers who do this type of development, and got positive feedback and results. So that's kind of the long view, but you really have done a lot. And I think it's important to be mindful of where we've come from and recognize that many people have got us to where we are today. During that process, because I've heard a lot of discussion back and forth, I think it's important that you've rejected things. And it's not just the State Hospital Committee. There was the notion of all new development. There was a low development scenario, a balanced scenario, and what they called market rate scenario. And all three of those scenarios were rejected by the State Hospital Committee, along with input from others, and that was in 2017. And that was a very hard time for the State Hospital Committee, so it took a lot of guts and gumption to kind of hold on to the vision of what Medfield wanted for Medfield. At the beginning of 2017, the committee really took the bull by the horns and developed 4 different scenarios. And one of those scenarios was saying, well, let's just demolish all the buildings and make it parkland. Well, that received some support amongst people. 9.6% of the people who attended the open house or attended virtually the open house said, we like that, but others said, you know, this is too much. We really want some development. We want a little more than that. So I think why I'm showing these two extremes is the notion of balance was really important. And in a lot of the community input solicited by the Master Plan Committee is people wanted to retain and really see this as our land and look for balance. So the plan has reflected a lot of compromises. It reflects a lot of compromises amongst committee members, as well as the various constituencies in town. Because I think you could find people along the continuum, some who liked some of those really strong new development proposals, and others who said that wasn't too much. And we had 3 scenarios. We had to make sure it was good for the town and Medfield and town finances. We needed to make sure it was good for the taxpayer, that it wasn't going to be a nightmare in a few years on the for the individual taxpayer. And we wanted to make sure it was good for the developer, and I think the development committee's work really spoke to that, as well as some of the financial modeling. So this really, as I said, took a balanced approach. It also tried to meet all the conditions of purchase, which is in the memorandum of agreement that the Board of Selectmen signed with DCAM and the Commonwealth. And there were several codicils to that memorandum of agreement with the Department of Agriculture and Mass Historic Commission. So this is what brought us here today. So we're specifically looking at zoning. I think it's helpful to look at what is the zoning today at the State Hospital, and that is the business industrial zone, which is in pink. In the upper middle section is the State Hospital property. And as you know, the proposed uses at the State Hospital include mixed use. It includes arts and cultural center. It includes residential. It includes senior housing. It includes millennial housing. It also includes commercial uses with options for restaurants, offices, as well as we looked at, a distillery use on it. So having that type of mix of uses does not conform to your business industrial. At the time, we also looked at, the State Hospital Committee looked at whether or not to do an overlay district, and we decided not to do an overlay district, but to create a separate zone for Medfield State Hospital. South of Hospital Road, which is currently zoned agricultural, and that includes Setting Hill, as well as the Odyssey House area, or the former Odyssey House area, which was slated as a potential Parks and Rec facility, whether or not the town wants to go forward on that. So the zoning for agriculture doesn't meet all the needs for that use as well, so overall there needs to be rezoning. At think it helps to think about why do we do zoning. Zoning is really a tool to implement a plan. You have a plan, you've market tested it, you've done a lot of public outreach, and zoning is really that implementation tool. And it helps you guide development in terms of the framework established by the plan. You can regulate uses, you can regulate dimensions, you can regulate the location of buildings. And overall, you want to provide for the health, safety, and general welfare of Medfield, so issues like water, while addressed primarily by the Board of Water and Sewer, are also addressed somewhat in the zoning as well. But zoning is aspirational. It's what you want it to, what you want to be, not what you're willing to settle for. And it's also a mechanism of control. And as owners of the property, you have many mechanisms for control. You've got the master plan, zoning bylaw, which is the regulatory framework to reinforce and implement the master plan goals. You'll be seeking a development partner, which you can then have a development agreement, which will further refine and specify what your expectations are and can address some nitty-gritty issues that are customarily not part of zoning, but are important to, may be important to Medfield. You're gonna need to execute that development agreement, then you're gonna have review in terms of permitting, whether that's planning board and site plan approval, whether that's the building inspector, or whether it's with connections with water and sewer or conservation. You have a range of local review tools, and also you have enforcement, whether that's enforcement of zoning, of your permits, or your development agreement. So you've got lots of tools for control. It's not just zoning. And I think that's important to be mindful of. We set up the zoning as to the various sub-districts. We have the within, which is in the handout that you have on zoning. It's the very last page. This is the black and white version. And I'm sorry that some of the drawings we had always used north being on your left because it was a way to get the plan all on the same slide. But we have the Northfield, the core campus, West Slope, the Arboretum, the Green, and then south of Hospital Road, Sledding Hill, and the South Field. And the water tower is a separate site that is owned by the town, but principally under the guidance of the Water and Sewer Board. Some of the rezoning process and timing, and I'm going to continue going through and then we'll have discussion afterwards, is we have an aggressive schedule in terms of looking at this as a kickoff meeting. We're here at September 3rd, and we're talking about in 2 months having a special town meeting on Monday, November 4th. So there's a lot of things that have to be done. The first legal notice would have to be into the press on this Friday, so that the planning board could have a public hearing on September 30th. So to move forward, we gotta get cracking. We anticipate the planning board would have a public hearing on the 30th and a second evening about public hearing and follow-up on October 7th. If there's gonna be a public forum, we've gotta establish a date. The warrant committee usually reviews town meeting articles, so we need to figure out how the warrant committee's schedule is going to put into the plan between now and mid-October. Final language of any zoning article has to be to the Board of Selectmen by October 15th, so the selectmen could add it to the warrant and then have enough time to have the notice of the warrant posted by October 21st. So in 6 weeks, we gotta have final language, everything done. Then the notice would have to be posted for town meeting, and then 8 weeks from now, we'd have town meeting. So put on your sneakers and get ready to run, we got work. One of the key issues is who's gonna be project proponent. You know, sometimes the planning board proposes zoning. The master plan committee at one point drafted the zoning, but they're kind of in a kind of advisory role. I don't know what your status is exactly. I'll let the select board just comment on that. You know, as the chief executive officers, you know, Pete, Gus, and Mike, you're the select board, so in many ways you might be the logical people to be project proponent. So we need to really kind of get clarity on that. So I thought it'd be helpful to look at what some of the roles and responsibilities were. Whoever's project proponent's got to you know, take the mantle and run with it and be an advocate and provide strong leadership and endorse the rezoning proposal. You need to participate in the public hearing before the planning board. You'd also be the lead on contacting other boards and committees to secure support and endorsement. And also speaking at town meeting with enthusiasm to muster at least 2/3 support of town meeting members to vote in favor. But I also think the reason why all of us are here is this is not the province of just one board. This is really a town-wide effort. This is town-owned property. And so if one entity is taking the lead, I think they need to ask for help from, and we all need to be willing to help run the marathon for the next 8 weeks. So that's what needs to be done. We also, key part of getting anything through town meeting is public outreach. As I mentioned, the key dates were September 30th for public hearing. I don't know if you want to have a presence at Medfield Day, but that's, you know, 11 days from now. We need to get local media and social media support. We need support and endorsements. Do you want to have a public forum? Who's organizing it? There needs to be a warrant committee meeting. We need a date for that, and we need special town meetings. So that's the big picture. So I'm here, you know, so are we ready to, you know, kind of like dive in?
I think the only reaction I had to it is that I think we've got to mail the warrant and call the special town meeting sooner than the last minute under the town charter. So I think we have to set the special town meeting date as soon as possible and mail the warrant sooner than, 14 days before special town meeting for an issue like this. So we've got to move that.
I didn't think a special required the mailing.
No, I know it doesn't, but I think we should have, my view is, for something like this, obviously we should mail.
Yeah. And let me give
I
a
don't think we
context
gotta-
on that date.
Last fall,
Yeah.
we didn't mail, and the warrant committee wasn't happy about that, people weren't happy about that, and I thought they had some fair points about that. I don't think that the criticism was unfounded.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, whatever we can do to accelerate it, obviously the actual text of the motion can vary, but I don't think we're gonna be changing the language of the zoning at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's gotta be an earlier.
And I just want to
Earlier.
provide context on the date and that
From my
schedule.
perspective, right.
That was just aiming for a fall town meeting, thinking when's the furthest out we can push it while still being fall. There might be some other alternatives that get discussed tonight, but that was just plucking a feasible date out of the calendar.
I'm just saying, for something like this, I don't think we can have people show up in their mailboxes or not show up in their mailboxes at all.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff we dealt with at the special town meeting last fall was relatively modest compared to this.
Yeah.
And so I think if people were to say, well, why, I always get something to mail for town meeting, this is a huge, this is a $500 million project you're asking us to support, I didn't get anything in the mail.
Yeah.
I think I would agree with the person making that criticism,
You know,
so.
one idea, Mike, if you want to follow up, is, and that's cost effective, which is always really important, is there's what they call every door direct mail, so you can mail it to every residential, as well as business address in Medfield, and use a postcard, and you can have a pretty large postcard, so you can get a lot of information, and you could include the links, and that's, if you're gonna do mailing, that is the most economical way to do it. And we could help you design the postcard, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not that concerned about saving money on the mailing, given the subject matter of the meeting. I think it's like
Well, also
$8,000.
people
What does the
read
warrant report
postcards
cost us,
because they
Christine,
don't have to open
to
them.
mail it?
It's about $1,000.
$1,000, yeah. So I don't think we need to skimp on the mailing.
Comments, Pete?
I guess one of the things that I was interested in, because I thought that we were still waiting to get information back from, is it PAR?
We have, yeah, the
and
development committee
demolition
has
numbers. So are we gonna be able to do the special town meeting on November 4th?
We are hoping their timeline is 4 months, so that butts right up against the beginning of November. Hopefully it can be produced a little bit quicker. And they know that we have timing constraints. We want the information as soon as possible. So that's the overarching issue with the consulting reports.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got, I think, two points, maybe three. I'm worried that the 4 November is too soon for the meeting, but not the first 6, not the idea of having the final wording for the zoning by the middle of October. And the concerns I have around November 4th, first, I'll be interested in hearing Todd's and Johnny's comments from a development committee standpoint, what they think around the timing, but I think we'll probably need to hear back from the warrant committee on whether they think they can do what they feel like they need to do in that kind of time. The concern I have is that we're underestimating the work that needs to go into that public forum and the public education. First off, there's not going to, I think it'd be a mistake for there to be one, because 40% of the people won't be able to make that one. And then if we don't have some alternatives, you know, Mike, you said it's a $500 million project. It's not a $500 million project yet, because we're not issuing an RFP to a developer. So I actually think the zoning vote constitutes the closest thing to a public endorsement of the master plan as it's conceived. And so it's not just, are you willing to go along with the zoning changes? I think it's, given where we want to take this directionally and qualitatively, are you prepared to approve the zoning that's required to enable the possibility of that happening? That may be just a slight bit different, because I'm guessing when we get real proposals in, there's going to be details that may or may not please people, that could change their minds, but we don't have to cross that bridge yet. So I'm concerned a little bit about the November 4th. I don't suggest that we stretch out the front end. I'm suggesting that we maybe build in a little more flexibility. Maybe that helps with PAR. But that does give us some flexibility, as long as we're pretty disciplined on the front end, to get all the, get the hearing process underway, getting the wording of the zoning article underway and complete by that mid-October. That makes sense. So that's reaction to schedule. The question about proponent, my view, one opinion, what do I know? My sense is that the selectmen ought to have a role of making sure that we do everything in our power to remove any obstacles that might slow the process down, that by the time we get to the town meeting, I would hope that we're speaking with a unified voice in favor of whatever the direction is that we're taking it. My first thought for a proponent, in terms of the actual person, group pushing, is either the development committee or potentially the zoning board, just because one is directly involved with the matter at hand, and the other, the development committee, has kind of been given the mantle to carry this process forward. So my own view, in thinking about that right off the top of my head, is that we would probably, I'd be happy to hear the planning board, the zoning board, and the development committee's opinions on who that would be, but I don't automatically think it's the selectmen that are literally picking up the guidon and moving forward. I think we're the ones that absolutely back it and absolutely make sure that nothing slows it down, but that would be my reaction to that.
So did you say zoning board?
Well,
Yeah, I just want to clarify that the zoning board of appeals wouldn't actually be involved, despite the term zoning in their name. It's actually an appeals to zoning board. So the planning board is
that's right.
actually the one that might sponsor an article. It's usually an article that they have a hand in crafting.
Right.
But I would like to actually turn it over to them. They get monthly or meeting updates at their meetings, every meeting, so they're aware.
The real question that's in my head around that, see, I never see the planning board. They're around the corner.
I know, they're tucked.
I think the definition, go over the definition of proponent again, Kathy.
really the proponent is like the petitioner. If you were a private developer who owned this property, it would be the owner. So in this case, technically the selectmen are the spokesperson, the owner of the town. And the selectmen signed the memorandum of agreement and did all the execution of documents related to the purchase and sale of the state hospital. But I know you're working in a collaborative atmosphere, and that the selectmen appointed the state hospital master plan committee, and they appointed the development committee. And as Sarah pointed out, the planning board sometimes initiates zoning when they've been involved in development of it. So I think there's a, I think committee people are also looking towards the selectmen to take some leadership, but also I think the selectmen are probably saying, well, we've got a full plate, we've got A, B, C, D, E, F that you're already on board for doing. So I think that's why you're having a joint meeting. And I kind of tried to identify what are the key things that would have to be done between now and a special town meeting. Because you need someone to shepherd, kind of be the steward. And I think steward is probably the right word, because if you were a private owner, you would be following this, day by day, hour by hour, making sure it gets done. And
So let me change your question then a little bit, because your definition of proponent there, I think it's a question of who logically should act like the owner in pushing the technical and administrative components of this process forward. In my head, I'm asking maybe who should be the promoter. This is not just a zoning change. This is not just development of some piece of property in Medfield. This is a major strategic decision that the town is making. We have different opinions about where that direction needs to go. So the issue on my mind is, who is it that's taking the temperature of the water of the town and is doing everything we can possibly do to responsibly represent this whole decision to the taxpayers in a way that when they do come to special town meeting and they vote, they are not doing what we oftentimes do with zoning boards, is we listen to the warrant committee says it's okay, there's an awful lot of complicated stuff to read in the actual zoning article itself. If they think it's okay, I guess we can approve it. It's not that. This one's, I think, gonna be a little different kind of a decision around, do I like where the town wants to go? And if I like where the town wants to go, then maybe I'm inclined to approve the zoning. And somebody has to be, and maybe it's us, but somebody has to be gauging whether we've done enough to pedal the bike uphill, is what I'm saying.
So the focus, the typical word that's used on individual articles is sponsor. So maybe that helps you to kind of frame who should be the one, because by statute, the selectmen usually, in the typical, the general framework, are somewhat passive. They take articles that are submitted by a certain number of voters, or we have a local bylaw that permits majority of any town committee to submit an article. So although you may take a position on it, that's separate from sponsoring, so.
Right, I will say, and I think institutionally, the board is the logical proponent of this project. I mean, the board appointed the development committee, appointed the master planning committee. The board has chosen to call a special town meeting. We have the authority to do that, to vote on this particular plan. We're obviously not calling a special town meeting because the board is opposed to the plan. If we were opposed to the plan, we just wouldn't call a special town meeting, we'd do something else. And clearly, a majority of the board supports the plan. I think the question is, on the various adjectives used in there, I think there's varying degrees of enthusiasm among members of the board for proposing this plan. And my own personal view is, I think the town meeting deserves a chance to vote on this. I'm mostly indifferent to whether they vote yes or no. And so I'm a proponent of it in the sense that we have to vote on this. We can't keep dragging it out and having it hanging out there as a possibility. I'm not opposed to it in the sense that and as I see this plan, as I've said before, the question in this plan is, do you want to preserve the buildings or not? That's the question. If the priority of the town of Medfield is preserving the buildings, this is absolutely the best plan we should have. It's the best shot we have to preserve the buildings, and this is what we ought to do. And I think that is the judgment the special town meeting is going to have to make, because you have emphasized repeatedly the flexibility of the zoning within the different districts, and that developers may propose different things in different areas. So if that is the sentiment of the town meeting, that is fine. And as I've said, my only principled position on this plan is simply the fact that Medfield taxpayer dollars should not be used in any way to facilitate the development of this plan. And so if this plan gets approved at special town meeting, then the question is, all right, which developer is going to pay for this plan without any assistance from the taxpayers of Medfield? And that's my only bottom line. So with that caveat, I think logically, I think the Board of Selectmen generally has done a lot of punting on hospital issues over the years, and I don't think we can punt on this. Clearly, we decided in May we were going to present the master plan as written to the special town meeting. We are calling the special town meeting. And so I think we should be, institutionally anyway, the proponent of the plan. I don't think we're going to be speaking with one voice on how enthusiastic we want this to happen. I don't know that we'd be arguing about it, but I'm certainly not going to give this to tell people that you have to do this. This is the greatest. This is the best, absolutely the best interest of the town, because I don't think it is. But if the priority of the town is preservation of the buildings, then this is the best plan, and they should do it if that's what they value. And that, to me, and to use McDermott's word for it, it's a legislative judgment of the special town meeting, and I'm certainly not prepared to deprive the legislature of the town of Medfield the opportunity to have their say on this. But so that's my view on it.
So I guess I think that it is logical for the selectmen to be the sponsor and the proponents of it. I think also that that we should look to the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee to have input and to carry some of the water on that. As a Board of Selectmen, I think it's likely that we're going to turn to Chris and Sarah and say, here's the issue, please organize it and take it forward. I don't see the three of us doing that personally. And it makes sense to have the town staff do it if they can.
And
My
Sarah?
reaction to that is I can do nuts and bolts, but this is a community issue that members of the community need to be enthusiastic about in order for it to have a chance at town meeting. So I think Sarah Lemke wanted to say a couple of words, but also I'd like to understand the rest of the group's positions as well. Yeah.
So I haven't consulted with the rest of the board, but I think we spoke about it in the past. We serve a statutorily required role in reviewing any zoning article, but as was mentioned before, I'll get closer to the microphone. So the planning board is required statutorily to review all zoning bylaw amendments. But with this zoning bylaw in particular, we didn't draft it. We didn't really have a hand in creating the plan, although we had a representative on the planning committee. But I think the planning board would be happy to serve a role of collaborating and also having our statutorily required hearing. But I don't think we feel like we're the appropriate proponents to kind of be the ones pushing this through.
Can I make a comment, please? When we were working on the plan, I had a chance to visit and meet with people from many of the other hospitals. And one of the things that jumped out at us was that pretty much in all cases, you had a strong individual or a strong body who was the driver of the plan, particularly to move it forward. And I think of Foxborough, that was true. I think of Northampton, where there was the same thing. I think of Westboro, where I actually went to one of the meetings and met the people. I think of Lowell, where there's a very strong force. So it takes an advocate who very emotionally believes in the plan. And even though there's going to be objections, there's going to be criticisms of it, can still drive that through. So it has to be And I think the other thing that comes out is it has to be an individual or a body that has the authority to make decisions, to make that go through. It can't be neutral, it can't be, this sort of wishy-washy kind of thing. It has to be a part of the town that has the conviction that this is the right thing to do, and then can push it through, even in adversarial conditions.
Gil, in those other towns, who did those advocates tend to be?
Well, in some cases, it was the mayor. In some cases, it was the senior planning person, like Westboro, for example. They're the two Jims that they called them. But that was the force. In other cases, I think Foxborough, for example, was more of the selectmen or the senior organization in the town. So it can vary. There's not a one single answer to it. But it has to be in our town, in Medfield, who is in that position to be able to drive it through, be able to get up in front of the town in a town meeting, on a workshop or an open house, and be able to make that strong statement. And will enjoy doing it, right? That likes to do it, want to do it.
Let me react to that with a couple of candid thoughts. First off, I think you've probably heard that the three selectmen as a group don't quite meet that criteria, just with Mike's comments. The master planning committee, to Pete's suggestion, actually, if I wanted to think of who in town is most likely to have someone who would bring that enthusiasm, because I agree with your point. That's exactly what I'm talking about when I say who's the promoter. I think there are members of the master planning committee who, we could probably find people on the master planning committee who would have those personal qualities and enthusiasm for the master plan. Todd and Johnny, my view on the development committee is the thing that we didn't have fully answered with the master plan was we didn't have buttoned down the business side of the vision. And so I personally have viewed the development committee as the committee that was going out to take the master plan, test it in the marketplace, and see whether we're going to have major flaws. And the good news was when the development committee did that, the feedback came back that said, no, we think this master plan is feasible. So I look at this whole thing as we're at a point where we've, on a preliminary basis, we validated the master plan as being potentially feasible. I actually am splitting hairs a little bit here, but I'm seeing the special town meeting getting the zoning in place as an enabling step. It's not the RFP, it's not the contract for development, it's simply the thing that either the town is going to tell us, yes, we like the direction, and if in fact the feedback is that, the master plan was reasonable, so we wouldn't expect to, think we're buying a cow and have an elephant show up. We're on a track that we can proceed with development and proceed to get real proposals. That's where I look at the development committee as kind of being the likely driver for that, assuming the planning board didn't want to take the reins up on that one.
If I just add to that, I think, the charter, if you will, of the development committee was very narrow. It wasn't to redo the plan, come up with a different plan. It was to take this plan to the development community and get feedback from professionals in the business. And we heard pretty clearly that the zoning was critical because of the size of the project. In contrast to a smaller project where a developer might want to be selected before the zoning was voted on so that they would have some influence over it and would get up at town meeting themselves and promote the change in zoning. What we heard was this is a massive project. The amount of money and time that a developer would have to commit to even respond to an RFP, drawings, technical studies is prohibitive without knowing that the town was behind this plan. And they expressed that the clearest way the town could demonstrate support for the plan was to pass the zoning before it ever went out to RFP. So I think, from the standpoint of the committee, and Johnny, tell me if you disagree, we don't feel like it's our plan, right? We were asked to evaluate this other plan. We didn't create the zoning. I think we understand the value of the zoning and support the zoning change, but I think it's difficult for us to be the proponent of the zoning piece of it.
And what I would, to Mark's point, I certainly don't have any problem with the Board of Selectmen being the name on the warrant article. That's not the issue. The issue is, to me, is where's the engine? To Gil's point, where's the enthusiasm, the driving force that's gonna, give life to this thing? We kept the master planning committee in place and basically reappointed master planning committee again this year, and I think, Pete, you probably were the lead proponent for that. But the reason the master planning committee stayed in place after the development committee was created, I think, was the stated willingness of the master planning committee to help with the education and the promotion of it. So, however, if something happened like that, where the development committee was driving anything, I don't see that as being just the development committee. I actually think the master planning committee members in support of that would play a big role in the education. So anyway, that's how
I still think that the board has to be the proponent of the plan, to the extent of Pete's view of having town employees working on it, the town employees work for the Board of Selectmen. I think there's been issues in the past with town employees dealing with the committees, and the committees in particular, how they dealt with town employees. And so I think we need to be the proponent of the plan. You two are more enthusiastic about this than I am, and you're the majority of the board, and we act as a majority. And so I think both of you should be willing to play as much of a role as you're willing to play in terms of advocating for the adoption of the plan. And I would hope that if the two of you did not think this plan was in the best interest of the town, we would have changed it, as I suggested doing a number of times over the last several years, and you said no, which is your prerogative, and I got outvoted, and that's fine. But I think we can't kind of come to the end and then decide as a board, having made these decisions along the way, having appointed these committees, then come to the end and then try to step back from where we are and say, well, okay, we're putting it out there, a name is on it, and we're for it, we're against it, because if you're really not certain about it, it's too late now, but if you really were not certain about it in May, we should have changed the plan in May. But as of May, when we made this decision to go ahead, there was certainty from the majority of the board to go ahead, and so I don't think we can now, punt it back to the master planning committee, which is down to 5 members, the development committee, which to Todd's point correctly, did not sign up to be the advocate for this plan. They signed up to sort of do a limited RFI testing of the feasibility of the plan, assuming the financial assumptions in the master plan, it would then be feasible. And that's what they did. So I think either the selectmen have to be the proponent of this, or the selectmen have to say, we're not gonna do this, we're gonna do something else. I don't think we can sort of inch it along without.
My issue, and I think Pete even reflected it, first off, if at best it's 2-to-1 vote, my guess is that it's still a 2-to-1 vote on this thing. I'm 4 square behind the plan. I'm 4 square behind moving forward with this zoning. I will accept if the town wants to vote it down, fine. If the town votes it and approves it, there's still something not on your slide there, Kathy. In addition to the process of controlling a developer, you have the control points. What's missing there is that the disposition of the property is another control point. So when we actually have a real proposal with a real course of action, the taxpayers, you have yet another opportunity to just say, I don't like the picture. And they can just refuse to dispose of the property in that way. So there's yet another control, which is a big part of why I am absolutely behind this plan. I absolutely want to see us get there. I do believe that the town should approve the zoning so we can get to the point where we have something serious to look at. The issue for me is kind of, I think, the same thing you did. When you said, well, we should be the proponent, but Sarah's got it. My point is somebody has to be the one who's putting that energy into it. And yes, I am worried that the Board of Selectmen has so many issues on its plate that for us to be the principal proponent as the sole or the only peddlers of the bike that's going uphill around the enthusiasm, I just don't know that we have the bandwidth to do that. It's not a resolve issue, it's a bandwidth issue. I'm just not sure we can.
Anyway, it's really important, if I may speak.
Absolutely.
Lucille Fisher. That the town understand the zoning. If you're gonna have a special town meeting in November, they have to really understand what it means, what's happening. There has to be good communication out there. I think for the 4 years that we had our committee, you know, we had a very, very strong communication outlay to the town and a back and forth with them. And I think whoever is the proponent has to have that aspect too. You know, you have got to have that communication ability, and not ability, but plan, because otherwise it's useless. You know, you're gonna call a meeting and people aren't gonna know what it's all about, and that's, you know, in November. So you absolutely have to have people committed to getting the message out there and getting it out there effectively, and getting all the answers, all the answers to their questions. So, you know, keep that in mind.
The master planning committee members are probably the ones who have been doing that up till now.
Well, we haven't done it in the last year. No one asked us to continue to get the word out. So there has been a year's gap in communication.
Right.
So people are out there saying, you know, whoever you meet, I don't know, help me out here. Whoever I meet, they're saying, what's going on? You know, when are we gonna vote? Do you know what I mean? So there's a big gap now. So you need to fill that gap with, and you guys have done great. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the fact that, you know, after the hard work of the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee, that you put your work in, and pretty much from your work it said this is a sound plan. You know, and that is really, I don't know, it makes me feel great. So I'd be curious, well, I have questions, I'll ask you later. But like I said, you've got to communicate to the public, and if you don't have that, it's not going anywhere.
So Lucia, my one reaction to that is I think the communication is slightly different than what the communication has been in the past. I think in many ways when the master planning committee was developing the master plan, there was a promotion and a desire to build enthusiasm, you know, aspirational discussions. I think for this, people have seen the master plan, and the key is to get the point across here that if you like the master plan, at least at the level that we've, you know, seen it come to fruition so far in paper, the reason that you need to approve the zoning to enable us to move forward with the master plan, it's making that point that the zoning enables something to happen
Right.
with the master plan. It's a slightly different message than
But
promotion.
of course it's a different
Okay.
message. But the process is exactly the same. When you are communicating. You know, the message may be different, slightly, although it is the same plan. It hasn't changed. There have been things that have gone on, but the process is the exact same in terms of communicating to the public. And, you know, we did have 2,000 people on the, or more, on the mailing list, 700 people following us on Facebook. You know, people were interested, and they were getting the message. So
But
it's
does
hard.
that mean you're no longer willing to do that? Is that, I mean, is that the message?
No,
that, I mean,
no,
it's-
no, I'm not saying that, Mike, at all.
My presumption was you would.
Yeah. Well, the only thing is, this is a very tight window to be sure that, you know, to get a good plan out. I mean, I do this for a living. So, and Brandy does this for a living, and it's a very tight window. So, anyway, that's all. I'm just saying, you have to make sure that component is in action. And going, you know what I mean?
I
Yeah.
just wanted to echo what Lucille said. The planning board sponsored an article for the senior housing overlay. We had all of the meetings we have to have, no one came. We had a consultant who gave a very thoughtful presentation to the 2 people who came to the hearing, and then it was voted down pretty significantly at town meeting. It didn't get very close. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that people didn't understand it. They weren't believing. I stood up at town meeting and told people why we thought this made sense from a planning perspective, and people didn't understand it. So it isn't worth going to town meeting if there isn't the capability to get out to the people who are going to, it's not the people at this meeting, it's the people who are gonna come to town meeting who don't understand these zoning articles and what they're for. So I think the public outreach is the most significant part, and the date needs to be chosen around when you think you can have someone who's gonna have these meetings that people will come to and understand what they're voting for. Or it's just not going to be successful.
And Sarah, I would guess that the knowledge of the people in town about the state hospital zoning is about the same as the zoning that you were trying to pass. I don't think people understand it at this point at all.
I think the benefit of the state hospital zoning is that it is tied to a plan. So the argument that you could say, if you like what I'm showing you in terms of this plan, then this zoning is the framework that enables that plan. For the senior housing, we didn't quite have that. We had the idea of, putting it up on, whatever, the Hinckley parcel, but we weren't as specific. So maybe if people could get comfortable with the plan, they could make themselves comfortable with the zoning. To some extent, people who are not professionals are never going to understand the zoning. But if they can like the plan, then maybe they'll take the leap to like the zoning. But I do think that there's an outreach that has to be done through mailings, through meetings, whatever other avenues. And the state hospital planning committee, I think, has a good following. But to Lucille's point, it's re-engaging that public outreach effort that needs to happen before town meeting, other than just the one meeting the planning board has to have, which, as I said, no one comes to.
Should that happen before we have a planning board meeting, so that people actually show up for the planning board meeting?
Ideally, or then it's just one of the many meetings that you have. If you want the technical parts, you come to the zoning. If you want a broad overview, you go to the one at the high school, or you read the thing on the website or the postcard.
Kathy, could you put the schedule, the sequence of dates back up? Yeah.
I will say about the schedule and your earlier comment, Gus, and if the warrant committee has any comments that pertain to language, that input would need to be before the deadline of submitting the materials to the selectmen. So that would probably need to be before October 10th, so there's enough time, or really before October 7th, so there's enough time to integrate all the boards.
So when I made the point about November 4th feeling tight, because it was really the stuff that Sarah's talking about is what I was getting at, the education part. What I'm looking at here, to Sarah's point, right now, the first public hearing is on September 30th. In my head, I'm saying you got 2 weeks, November 4th or by November 18th, or it's after Thanksgiving, and I don't think that's a good idea. So I'm only talking about 2 extra weeks if we do anything at all. The question would be, would you delay somehow or another, I kind of like the idea that the ads go out on, we don't let the ads be a problem, but would you delay the public hearing to allow for a public education, at least some initial public education, or is it like public hearing number 1 goes off on time, we get an initial reading of the waters, and you might delay public hearing number 2 before, to provide more?
I would say, with all due respect to the planning board, that the technical details of the zoning here are not what's going to drive this judgment. I mean, I think if people like the plan and they decide that that's what they want to have happen, they'll be in favor of it. I think, I can't see people coming to a planning board, if you go to a planning board hearing, it's because you want to change to some aspect of it. And I just can't imagine people's views being specific enough, regardless of the amount of outreach, to say, I want to change this zone to that and this zone to that. I mean, I think, I would say that the outreach has to be around the overall master plan, what the vision is, what comes next, what the options are, what the preferred scenario is, as opposed to, I would almost, not that it's unimportant, but I think the actual planning board zoning hearing is a required regulatory step, and the outreach is more around the preferred scenario and the master plan itself.
So the planning board would probably keep us straight from a legal, technical process standpoint, and you're saying probably could do that independently. If that were the case, then as I'm looking at the October dates, with the final language being October 15th, and let's stick with that, then the education piece of this would be in the probably after the final language, but not too far after the final language. And generally, it seems that education, you don't want education too much more than a month in advance of the meeting anyway. So from a planning, I mean, you could do early stuff. I'm not disagreeing with communications, but, okay, talk to me, Lucille.
I'm just saying, a month is a very short period of time. So, I mean, it would have to almost start.
What I'm getting at is, when do people start paying attention to, I mean, communications is one thing. I'm talking about some sort of an interactive, like a public forum, and I'm thinking it's more than one.
That's exactly what we do, is it's interactive. It's not just blasting out information.
So what I'm worried about is the attention of the voters being there much more than a month before they might be asked to vote. That's where I'm coming from.
I think the voters really.
I would just say, Gus, I think maybe that people's attention span kicks in the month before, but you gotta be planting seeds
Yeah.
and starting your communication much more,
Yeah,
much
Yeah.
more in advance of a month. So it's kind of like an iceberg. You see the 1 month as the iceberg, but then there's the stuff below the water that you're not seeing. And I think that's where I'm seeing Lucille's face, and I'm seeing Brandy like fidget and grimace. They're like, no, 2 months?
Right, and
So-
I could speak to that, Brandy. The idea of our communications and our outreach was partially to educate, partially to excite, but it's true that stuff underneath the water is what's really important. And I think we've tried over the past year to keep people just, interested. Every once in a while, we would send out notice of one of John Thompson's walking tours, or just to let them know that the state hospital still existed, keep it, up in their mind. We've put out some of Jean's work on the chapel. So we've tried to keep people's interest up, but we haven't had that content. I think, right. So once we start up again now, the idea is to reintroduce them to the idea of the fact that there is a plan out there, to start spreading some of that education, as the basis, and then explain that to see this, here's the zoning. So by the time the zoning is finalized, that we have something to send out and say, here it is.
Hey, Gus? John Thompson. One of the things that's helped me with interpretation of the property was we did a Eagle Scout project up there where we put a polyboard that identifies the buildings and their former purpose. And it's used every day. There's visitors that come and orient themselves on that polyboard sign. If the town were to put a polyboard sign of the master plan up there, where they could see what the plan elements are, and maybe if you want to have a short description of the zoning underneath that or next to it, I'm happy to interpret that for people if they have, people ask me, what's going to happen to this place? And I did laminate a copy of the master plan, which I use, but it's small and it's hard to read the legend. So maybe something like that where people can do it. I mean, there's walkers up there every day and they're asking these questions. Maybe something like that would help. I don't think you could just put it up there on a piece of plastic. It has to be like a polyboard sign. But just looking at dates, right? I mean, so the drop dead date to finalize the warrant report doesn't have to have everything in it, right? So it's got to have the final language of the zoning in it. It's got to have whatever insert we plan to put into it, which I suspect would be a truncated summary of the master plan and the picture of the map and all that kind of stuff. And that if let's say we push this back to November 18th, just looking at my calendar here, then you're looking again around the same October time frame for finalizing the mailing. And so let's say the mailing goes out sort of that second to last week of October, the week of the 21st, so people have it at least 3 weeks before. I mean, that would still give us probably 6 weeks from now to work on that report, with the general notion that what's gonna be in the warrant report is gonna essentially be the zoning that's been proposed. I mean, as the project proponent, if that's what the selectmen are gonna be, we are proposing what's in the master plan, that's not gonna change. We can put in there whatever information we're going to have. And then there is the added question of sort of the additional outreach, but I would think as to the material, you've got the existing material that is sort of on the shelf for a year, because that hasn't really changed. I mean, there's gonna be some new inputs, assuming we get the estimates on the demolition and the rest of it. And so there probably has to be, you know, a Christine Trueller patented fact sheet of some kind
Love my fact
to go
sheets.
in there. But that would have the information from the water and sewer, the new water and sewer estimate, what the demolition costs are going to be. Presumably, the work that we've sort of authorized to be done under the auspices, that'll be done as well. And so then you kind of look at really November, to your sort of attention span point, Gus. I mean, this stuff's on to mail, and then you've still had almost 2 months to plan whatever those meetings are gonna be, the information sessions are gonna be. If we take November 18th as the last day in November that we can do it, because I think that Thanksgiving is the following week, right? So, I mean, does that, to the marketing gurus and experts, does that sound like a possibility?
So I would start sooner with the marketing, I would start right away. I would take the plan, and I would do the boards that John's talking about, and I wouldn't just put them up at the state hospital, I'd put them down at the front of the library, in the townhouse, and I'd put them anywhere I could, so that people really see them.
So
Put 'em in the pizza
we're
parlor.
engineering the communications plan. I think we were having a discussion around responsibilities that we need to get clear. So the schedule, I guess, I'm gonna, as far as everything through the October 15th on that schedule, I think that's fine, and we shoot for it all. The real issue I have is the public outreach. The question I have is, we're having this discussion, Randy and Lucille and the rest of the master planning committee, it is readily apparent to me that you would be, some subset of you would be the logical and best resource to be thinking about that public education and outreach. Todd, I'm going to flip the coin rather than asking, it started off saying, well, I would think that maybe the members of the master planning committee would work with the development committee. Should the development committee just stay out of this entirely? How would?
I don't think so. I mean, I think where we ended up was, we felt like there were certain questions that, you know, if we put ourselves in the shoes of a voter at a special town meeting, we didn't want the answers to.
Okay.
And so out of the annual town meetings, the money was appropriated.
Yep.
This is part of that, the water and sewer is part of that, and there's an environmental piece.
Okay.
We're not gonna have all that information, I would say, until early November.
Yep.
So, you know, I
So-
assume the warrant is about the zoning, and these other pieces of information are probably fact sheet type materials that would be available for the actual meeting, but probably not very far in advance of the meeting, particularly water and sewer.
So what I would see there is that the development committee are going to be the folks, let's for a second here say that the master planning committee picks up the ball on communications and education. I would expect it, ideally, I think it would be a collaboration, because I think the development committee would be the group that would be asking the hard-nosed questions that weren't being asked in the early stages when we were developing the master plan, not in the context of challenging the master plan, but in the context of saying, we think voters, you know, are going to have these questions about infrastructure, and it's not master plan, it's that stuff.
Gus,
Yes?
could I ask a question from the warrant
Yep,
committee's
please.
perspective? So when we do review it, we're gonna want those infrastructure costs, I think, as part of the review. So what I'm hearing is that those might not come until shortly before the town meeting, but you're gonna want our comments by like October 7th.
No. I think, I mean, generally, Kathy, the warrant committee does not comment on the contents of the warrant report. They just vote yes or no on what's in there. So I don't think we'd be looking for you to change
No, but how do we,
the
in
zone.
terms of how we vote, we're gonna make a recommendation,
Oh, sure.
right? And we're gonna need to understand if we recommend a zoning, it's gonna be based on us thinking that this plan is feasible, which would be based on some infrastructure costs.
Right.
So,
That's really not how we're looking at it, I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, we're anticipating that voters at town meeting will want to understand the implications of not voting for the zoning, and what are some of the other potential costs to the town. It's entirely possible that many of the water and sewer costs, for example, could be borne by a developer. And that would, I think, be the goal of the town, to try to shift that. But what we found during our year or so of meetings is there's a lot of anecdotal, 5 years ago, somebody gave this number, and we were having a hard time just trying to get to a baseline of information. So that, it doesn't really impact the language in the zoning.
No, but it impacts their judgment about whether they should encourage the town meeting to vote yes or no on it, right? So, but I'm, just in terms of the project layout, getting the warrant committee enough information, enough time is a problem for the project proponent to make sure the schedule is set appropriately.
Okay.
And so if the issue, if the issue is gonna be that, we're not gonna have these real numbers until the beginning of November, we have to take that into account in setting the schedule, because we don't wanna dump it on you and say, well, sort through this now, right? And so that's, because part of what we're trying to get is and I think is in addition to the rah-rah cheerleading for this, also providing actual factual information from which people can draw different conclusions. Because I've never, the master plan, as much as enthusiastic as you all are, I also think you've all been honest about the plan, right? And so nobody's here saying this thing is a slam dunk and the financial model shows it's a massive winner immediately. And, what it shows is it's a slight winner occasionally with a big subsidy from the town, right? That's what it shows. And you've been honest about that. And I think in presenting this, even as strong proponents of it, we have to present it honestly, in addition to cheerleading for it, right? So it can't just be that this is going to be a marketing campaign. It's got to be an honest appraisal of this, because it's obviously not a slam dunk, the only thing we have to do, right? I mean, it's no one can suggest that that's the case. And so it's people think it's the best thing to do.
And the master plan doesn't suggest that.
Exactly. That's why I'm saying. That's why I've also disagreed with them about their concerns about the due diligence and the rigor of the process, which I had no issue with whatsoever, and I was proven correct by the outcome of the development committee process. But I think we have to make sure the information that gets out is accurate. And some of the accurate information is going to form the fodder for arguments against the plan at town meeting. And that's just the reality of it. And we have to. The last thing we need is having people think they're getting a sales job from just the people in this room.
Mike, marketing is not.
No, I understand that. I didn't mean to use that as a pejorative.
Yes, no, I know, but it is about telling the truth. At least
Just like lawyering, Lucille.
It's not Mad Men anymore.
Let me make one point, because, can I make one point first? Just because I want to tag on to Mike. The one point I would make, because Mike's made the point twice in the meeting around the subsidizing from the town. I agree with the philosophy behind that point. However, the town already has a financial liability associated with taking care of those buildings. It's not an unlimited liability, but when we look at this, it's not just a question of, not a dime from the town, because the town is already in the hole around a financial liability. So
Right.
I agree with you.
I'm not a dime for the town on this plan.
Yeah.
If there was a plan that had a benefit for the town, I'd be.
Well, in other words,
of that.
if the developer absorbed the liability of taking care of the buildings, then in the cost to the town of enabling that, perhaps their infrastructure cost or whatever, was less than what the cost of the town would be for taking care of the buildings themselves, then we have grounds for at least presenting that option to the taxpayer. I'm with Mike, if it came to the point that says, this is an option that's gonna cost us even more than our option of taking care of the buildings on our own and selling off the land or doing something like that, then I'm with him. I don't think we wanna take the town down a path for aesthetic reasons that's more costly, but we can't look at it as just any money from the town as a giveaway, because we already are in the hole for the remediation and demolition.
I just want to add, not to speak out of turn here, one of the developers during the interview process said, we don't want a public-private partnership, we'll take it all on. So in order to get those bona fide responses and real responses from the development community, we have to pass zoning in order for them to legitimately be interested. Now that is anecdotal because, it didn't go on record someplace, but, it was one response from
This
a
is where
developer.
the warrant committee is going to have a challenge, because you're not going to have precise numbers. We're not actually putting any funding on this article. So you're gonna have to kind of look at the concept, look at, bigger than a bread box, smaller than a barn. Do we think it looks prudent at this stage in the process to support it? Or do we see, there's an uncovered nuclear reactor in the basement of Building 5 that we didn't know about, and don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. So.
I think the only thing for a zoning though is that it is just a tool and a framework. It's not an approval of a project or any in particular.
But it does
development
rule out,
scheme.
I mean, it locks in a certain type of project.
Well, the zoning doesn't, I mean, the zoning is flexible. It's designed around a plan, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't, modify it. You could also amend the zoning later. So you wouldn't be stuck with it, and you have the multiple levels of control that were in Kathy's presentation in terms of the disposition process, the development agreement. So I think Sarah's point is well taken, that, you need to put this framework in place to do anything there. I think the little bit hard part with that is I think the lay voters at town meeting are gonna have a harder time with that leap of faith of just disposing it to a developer who could theoretically do kind of any plan with the zoning than if the town were more involved. But again, I think part of the education process has to be that this is just the framework to set up a process where they would come back before the town and seek approval.
I mean, the biggest thing going forward is trust. Because we're launching this big, huge ship. And first, we have to trust ourselves enough that we aren't gonna essentially 100 yards offshore, gonna crash this thing on the rocks. And so, all these people in the room need to sort of convey amount of trustworthiness that we can steer this. We might not end up at our final destination, but we're gonna keep this ship afloat and safe until it reaches its final destination. And so the voters at the town meeting have to trust that there is a vision, that the people overseeing this are trustworthy financially as well as what happens further. And so at the end of the day, they need to understand the process, all those checks and balances going along the way, so that we're not just sort of giving you carte blanche and off you go. So there is a certain amount of trust involved. So again, I think there's a first thing is establishing trust. And the best way of doing that, again, is sort of letting them know as much as they can know and see the process, and then go from there. And that zoning is that first sort of, here's sort of a kind of a map of the world. Here's sort of the general direction we want to go. And at the end of the day, everything is going to be okay. And it may not end up looking exactly like this at the end of the day, but the ship is still going to get to its destination safely without crashing on rocks. And I think that's what's driving a lot of people in this town, is fear and lack of trust.
I'd like to go back to the point of the proponent. And I think that the senior people, the elected people in this town, have to be the proponent of this. You have the authority. You have the standing. You have the reputation. So I think you can't delegate this to a bunch of committees.
So define proponent, though, Gil. The responsibilities that you think we should handle, what are they?
Just like what I said, I think what you have to do is enthusiastically support it. I think you have to advocate it publicly in meetings. I think you have to deal with people who have objections to figure out how to solve those objections. You have to be, in other words, you have to be viscerally involved with this, not standing off on the sides and kind of commenting on it. You have to be in front of this. And I think if you look at these other towns, in all cases, or the ones that I looked at least, there was somebody at a senior level that did that. And I think that's your responsibility in this. And in terms of bandwidth, too, you hear this thing about bandwidth. This has got to be one of the most important issues for this town. It's got to be very high on your priority list, not one of 1,000 different things. You have to dedicate the time to it. And I don't think you can delegate it to a development committee or a master planning committee or a planning committee. It's your responsibility.
Gil, my experience was, I think, last year with the ALS Study Committee, which was relative to this, was a micro example. And one thing I learned that was successful, the one thing I learned is the amount of effort that it takes to go into educating, being available, countering the erroneous comments, and then re-countering them, talking to people, getting them convinced, and then re-convincing them because they flip-flop back. I'm telling you, I don't think us three are in a position to do that. Enthusiasm, standing foursquare behind it, I think two of us are able to do that without qualifications, and one of us is able to do it in principle, I guess. Maybe I'll let you describe it the way you'd like, Mike. So in terms of telling people we think they should definitely vote in favor of this, that's not the issue. The issue is somebody has to pedal a bicycle, which is a complicated bicycle that requires effort up a hill. And I view it as the education issue. It's not the other stuff. That's the piece I don't think we're going to be able to do.
I think what we said is we have, potentially you have a strong committee that could do that part of it.
That's the part.
But you have to own it. You have to own the idea, not delegate it to some committee to own it. You have to personally own the idea. And I don't think you can delegate that.
I know I don't disagree with you in concept, but in practical terms, I'm trying to understand what that actually means.
I think it means being at all the meetings and being sort of sitting where you are now,
Yep.
and then when questions come up, whatever, about expertise, there will be all these other people sitting around the table and sort of saying, getting answers here and there, but at the end of the day, you're the one saying, I believe in this project, the selectmen believe in this project, and we have these people backing us up and supporting us in that. And you don't have to do all the legwork, you just have to show up in the meetings and basically be the standard bearer.
So let me talk to two of you. So I'm already on the development committee.
Right.
This is, to me, the next step of the development committee for the next 2 months. I am willing to do, for whatever this group is, what I've been doing with the development committee, which is making all the meetings at least that I could, not the last one, but because I was out of town. So if that's the issue, I'm willing to do it. Pete, you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, no, I mean, I've been working on this for years and want to keep working on it, absolutely. And I'm invested in it, that's why I spent the time looking at the zoning, making some suggestions that I think makes the zoning better. But I'm not a marketing person. I'm not gonna be able to go out and create the boards that John's talking about to put up at the hospital, and so I need
No, but
somebody to
I
do
think
that.
it's more, at the public forum, you're the ones kicking it off,
Yep,
being
that's
at
fine.
town meeting, you're the
Yep.
ones making the presentation initially to say, here's why we gotta do this. I think that's what he's talking about. I don't think he's talking about tweeting and all that sort of
Yeah.
thing. I think he's talking about that.
Right.
aspect.
It's
Thanks for
becoming
making you
a
the face of the
visionary.
project.
It's becoming a visionary, not a consultant.
Right.
Not trying to think of the pros and cons, or from a legal point of view, all the issues that could happen. It's becoming much more forceful. It's becoming a visionary for this thing and explaining it publicly and doing that consistently, and not one as an individual. I think it's important for all three of you to have that view.
I think basically it's leadership, taking leadership and ownership. And then everything else, I think that's what you're saying too, Greg?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Coming to the planning board. You might not be sitting up with us, but you'll be in the audience and sort of, and being always having your face at all the public meetings.
So we'd have to work out mechanically how we would do it. I think you have that. I think we have to figure out how we would deliver it in terms of what you have in mind.
Let me give you two anecdotes.
Mhm.
One's kind of an anecdote about rowing. And in order to get where you want to go, if you row and you have an 8-person show, you need a coxswain.
Mhm.
And the select board need to be the coxswain. And you're telling everyone how to row, but you're the coxswain. And
Well, I'm
you're not
definitely the
even
last pick for
You're
coxswain.
not
No,
even facing forward, you're facing your audience, and you gotta get us all to row even.
Right.
So think of yourself as the coxswain for this master plan.
So now I'm hearing two things, because what Mike described the Board of Selectmen would do to me is what you're describing, which is making sure, if this is the process we're following, making sure that information that one group needs, you know, the Warrant Committee needs, or the Planning Board needs, or the Development Committee needs, that information is flowing back and forth, and that's a, I don't know, management oversight, I don't know what to call it. When you described it, I said, yeah, that's for sure something we should do, can do, and there's the, you know, there's the structure.
But
The enthusiasm piece is
that's
a little
the
different.
pace. And make sure, you know, when people are getting tired, they kind of give a little, you know, or when people need to slow down so you don't run into something. So
Mhm.
the captain's a navigator of sorts too. The second anecdote I was gonna say is, in addition to working with cities and towns like Medfield, I also work for private developers. And whenever I've been on a major project, my client, the private developer, is the captain and lead. And we may all argue as team members, but when we're in public and once the decision is made, we're all one. It's one voice. And at public meetings, my client may not, usually doesn't answer most of the questions, usually calls on any number of one of us on his team to answer it or address it. And, or we may be present, sometimes we're silent, sometimes we're called on. But that's kind of the role of what the select board needs to do. So I would say to the rest of you, you can't expect leadership without being right there. You gotta, taking the first analogy, you gotta be rowing and, you know, doing all the pressure in time, but you also gotta be there right next to it and being backing up. So it's not just the, you know, it's a unified piece, and I think that's what's really important.
Unfortunately, we're required by law to do our arguing in public, so.
So those are my two answers.
All right. I'm not quite sure how to resolve this. I don't think in principle there's an issue. In practical terms about what this actually looks like for three people trying to, in a sense, be a focal point as a lead, that's the piece I'm struggling with. I think, Mike, and you can throw your hat into the ring on this, but my sense is that the person is either Pete or me in the sense that we actually have more direct enthusiasm for having this thing go forward. I want to see this play out. I want to see what we get for proposals next spring before I basically say all this hard work wasn't worth anything. Pete, I think you're maybe even more enthusiastic about that than I am. So I'm trying to figure out how, it feels like it's got to be one of us is somehow or another the lead in driving.
Why not both
All
of you?
three of you.
All three of you, I'd like to see. That's my opinion.
You don't want to have conflict, you know, you don't want two of you saying one thing and somebody to say something else.
Well,
You
but, okay, well,
You
with
want
three of
all
us, you're going
three
to
of
get a
you to
nuanced
endorse the
position.
plan strongly.
Okay.
So
Okay.
let's give the selectmen a little space. I think you've been very effective in communicating what your expectation is, and but I think there's also some logistics, and I will say, picking up on what Gus said and kind of listening to Mike and Pete's comments, I sense a willingness, though there's, you know, some differences of opinion. I don't think you're all one voice yet, but there's parts of it one voice. That practice, you know, just like the coxswain isn't the greatest when they're first starting out usually, you kind of, you know, have to practice a few times. So in the weeks to come, let's figure out the schedule. And I think the three of you probably need to talk amongst yourselves as well, and you all may need to continue having some more dialogue. I'm not letting you off the hook, but I think.
Well, can we, the three of us, agree that at least Kathy's schedule out through the 30th of September, and the planning board, you should weigh in as well, but at least out through the 30th of September. This schedule looks right. We support it. We're ready to move ahead with this.
My only, this is a highly technical comment, is there are no schools on September 30th because of Rosh Hashanah. Does that pose a problem with town hall not being open?
Town hall is open, but I don't, are there,
It's not
It-
really
it-
good form
Religious-
to have
yeah.
It
a
starts
major
on
public
Sunday night,
hearing
but
on
it
Rosh
goes
Hashanah or
until
Yom
Tuesday.
Kippur.
I usually look at the,
Rosh Hashanah is 2 days.
Yep.
Yom
Okay.
Kippur is 1.
So I don't think our intent would be to schedule it on a religious holiday, but I don't think the
But we
30th.
don't have an issue with having a meeting the week of
Yeah, that-
September
yeah.
30th.
Okay.
Yeah. Are we okay? We all okay with at least that part of the schedule is?
Oh,
we
yeah.
could maybe do it on October 2nd, which is a Tuesday?
Wednesday.
That's Wednesday.
I don't know. Wednesday.
We meet on the first.
We meet on the first Tuesday, so it's.
Yeah, so that's why so Board of Selectmen would meet on Tuesday, and then Planning Board could potentially meet on Wednesday, the 2nd.
Or just do it the following Monday, the 7th?
I think we
By
need to
law,
look
do
at
we
the
have to have 2
schedule.
nights? Is that the rule?
Yeah.
I'm, November 4th gives me some concern in terms of timing, because if I don't have the three of you ready to shepherd the project forward and still working on the logistics of how the three of you are gonna do that, then we're not gonna make November 4th. I think at a minimum, you need to look at November 18th. I did just check with the moderator, he is available on the 18th, but he also suggested he's available on January 13th if you were looking for an alternative date.
So I was just gonna raise that issue about why we're looking at November instead of January or February. I mean, I think there's a lot of education that needs to go on for the town's residents.
So I'll answer that for myself, is that we are really quick to always push the dates out, and I don't think you gain anything between Thanksgiving and January 13th by way of education, because once the holidays start, that's not really a month and a half. It's like almost no time. And if you do schedule anything in early December, you'll get a half the participation that you're hoping for. So given that this
I would
is,
go with the
It's the
18th.
Monday of Thanksgiving week, so
Yeah.
for families
This is-
that
18th is
travel, that's a tough night.
No, it's the following week. Thanksgiving's really late this year.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
so it's just my jaundiced view that we always find good reasons to push it out 2 or 3 more months.
No, I agree, and
with you.
Sarah and I were talking earlier that the November 4th date seemed so far ahead when we were looking at it in April, that now it's September 1st. Are we rushing? We're only gonna get one bite at this, really, to do the zoning and explain this well to people. If we don't educate them well, just because we're worried about making that time frame of November 4th, November 18th, I just get a little nervous about taking that. But I recognize we need to set a date and work backwards.
I'm committed to a special town meeting in Medway on November 18th, so.
Well, that takes you out of this entirely, Mark. You should be rooting for that date then. Hey,
He was
I
gonna
wasn't
leave, but I
there.
wouldn't
Whatever
let him.
happens, I wasn't
That's
there.
fine, that's fine.
I think as long as we can get the,
Sounds like you prefer January 13th.
well, no, I would prefer to have the infrastructure costs, whenever that is. So if we can get those by.
Right, so that contract takes early July, and they have 120 days, so we may be able to get
Yeah.
pieces of it, maybe able to expedite it, but.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that
120 days, so that's-
information is then gonna be fed into the financial model for further review, that's hardly any time at all for that.
Well, I don't think that that's what we were anticipating on the development committee. We felt that that was important information for town, so I, do not understand well enough the role of marketing, timing and all of that. But the point you made earlier about other control points in the process, I mean, we were thinking of this as a vote on zoning. And the zoning, if the zoning passes, is not, when we talked about this at the selectmen's meeting when we presented, what is the downside of passing the zoning? If we never get to a plan that's financially viable or appealing to the town, then nothing happens, but you could change the zoning, you could just leave that zoning there and never do it again.
Well, the downside is the lost time, right? I mean, it's,
Right, and some money, but I think it would be a very high bar that you would have, and I think the kind of information that you would want is gonna come much later in the process.
Well,
than the zoning.
and then it may just be that you don't get a whole lot of review from the warrant committee then. Because our charter is to review the financial impact on the taxpayers, and we may not be able to do that at this point.
I don't think we
May I
will.
make a suggestion? What, can you push it down a little bit to give everybody more time?
Push it.
Mid-January, like January 13th?
I'll tell you what I think will happen if we do that. We will not be talking about an RFP at the spring town meeting. We'll be having a discussion about a special town meeting next fall at best. And so if we want to give it yet another 6 months in a potentially downside real estate cycle, yeah, we can do that.
Well, we're kind of already there, though, right? The difference between November 18th and January 13th is 2 months. And look, I agree with you, Gus, that that's likely what's gonna happen. I mean, the reality is, though, even if it were to pass on November 18th, I think just given the way all of this has gone, we won't get to an RFP in time for a spring town meeting anyway.
I have more faith in the development committee than that myself.
It's not a lack of faith in the development committee.
Is it possible, and I haven't worked with the development committee, so I don't know the answer, in terms of drafting the RFQ, RFP, I'm assuming you probably may do a two-step process on this. Is it something that you could then be ready, and have that ready so you're not starting it after zoning is enacted, but kind of drafting it up before that?
Well, we discussed that, and I think the feeling at the time of the committee was, the committee didn't want to prejudge what the outcome of special town meeting would be and spend
A lot of
money
time.
that was authorized by the town on something that was never going to reach that stage.
Okay.
This to me this truly is an enabling step. This is not commitment. This is simply setting up the situation where we can realistically go out and expect to get responses. So to me, the real decision is when there's an actual proposal on the table for this is what we want to do and this is how it's going to work. If this was a farm, we're plowing the field, we haven't planted a crop yet. And we're debating whether we need more time to decide whether or not to plow the field. And
So, Gus, I wouldn't wait then for the warrant committee review. I mean, I would think we would have our primary financial review at that next stage.
I think you're right. Yeah.
That's
I think
really.
you're right.
This is
Of
where
this,
we-
but of
as a
this,
must
I mean,
review, yeah.
of this particular plan, though, right? I mean, so it's, for all the flexibility, this does pick
Pick the
this
plan.
plan. And it will exclude for any number of years, less ambitious plans. And so I think the reality is, I mean, I appreciate the desire to soft pedal the importance of the decision just to try to get a yes vote to get to the next step. But I don't think it's actually just an enabling step. It is a choice that this
I don't-
master
I
plan
don't
is what
see
we
that.
want to do.
I don't see how that's true. If we have, the zoning we're talking about is zoning which maximizes flexibility.
No, it does
of use.
not. I mean, I'm not really litigating this again. It absolutely does not. It picks the cheapest places to develop and declares them off limits to development. So it does not maximize flexibility. But again, that decision has been made. And so, to me, I would not want to be on November 18th and have people saying, we just got water and sewer stuff a week ago, and what are they not saying? And what else do we, I mean, to me, if there are deliverables to come that are going to factor into the judgment here, we ought to have enough time with those deliverables to do this. I mean,
Yeah, I just don't see it that
Can
way.
I add a point? I think that what this conversation is just highlighting the fact that education among this group, I mean, I know I'm completely ignorant as to how tightly this zoning proposal restricts us and what the cost might be to change the zoning in the future. I mean, I guess that might be what we look at financially, is what does it cost us to go to this zoning with this town meeting? And maybe it's a good plan, but maybe it's not. What does it cost us in time and money if we have to go back and rezone?
But we have that, though. I
Can we
mean, we've
add
got
that?
an analysis of what it costs to carry the buildings, right? So, I mean, I think that's
That's one piece.
that's what we have, which is modest compared to the other costs we've got.
Clearly, that's one piece, but in my mind, one piece is looking at how, if we go forward with this zoning, how much does it prescribe what has to come out? And then how much can we move forward? What are the steps and the costs that are gonna have to be implemented if this doesn't fly? To go to the next step, just education about, we have to move forward. We've been sitting for way too long, but what does it cost us to take this step, to take the next step? Are we doing this prudently?
Right, and look, the warrant committee, if we go to November 18th, the warrant committee has the option just to say we're not gonna recommend one way or the other. That we don't think that, we don't have a view on this
Or you
zoning,
can't-
and
yeah,
we'll
maybe not a
evaluate.
financial recommendation.
Yeah, we'll evaluate the plan down the
I
road.
can't speak for the chairman, but I do know in the past, he has wanted us to have a recommendation one way or the other. So I don't think we would be saying we don't have a recommendation. If we truly didn't have a recommendation, then I think we would say we're not recommending it.
It would
But again,
just
you
be
have
like
the master plan.
Like the
You have
warrant
the
committee
financial
recommends
plan.
for all previous zoning. It's not, you know, the warrant committee doesn't, for zoning, it typically doesn't look at it as financial, because actually that's not the entire reason the warrant committee is there, is to review all warrants. It just so happens that every year, the most important warrant is the budget.
But this is a town-owned piece of property, so it's a little different, I think, than other general zoning.
Right, but it's still, you have to, understanding the zoning and then what it can allow or won't allow, and then make a judgment on that.
I think I agree that maybe the financial decision is whether or not we're using our town resources to zone like this, and then potentially have to rezone if that doesn't work, and, you know, like, what are the risk and rewards of zoning?
But again, it
Doing
goes
the
back-
zoning, not doing the project, doing the zoning.
Yeah,
But
but the
again,
zoning
it's
leads
about
to-
trust of this group, a piece of
Mr.
If it
Chairman.
doesn't, what's the next?
of
step?
steering the
Yeah.
ship. And if
So-
it requires 5 years down the road to make some
Minutes.
tweaks to the zoning, I'm pretty confident that everybody here is able to kind of wade ourselves through that and kind of understanding what the market is now different, or developer comes back with a slightly different plan, that, oh, crap, that's a really good idea if we only tweak the zoning this way and that way, and you sell it as such.
Let me turn the mic over to Mark Searle.
So the real education here that you need to do is the second step of this process. So to dovetail on some of the comments, the zoning can act as it's basically an enabler. It can act as a restrictor, depending how it's drafted. But you need to get the electorate to understand that this just allows it to proceed, and that the town, because it's the owner of the property, has tremendous control over how you actually execute. Down to the LDA can be very, very specific. It can add additional restrictions and things that are not in the zoning. It can provide all kinds of oversight. I've done smaller projects that have, for instance, carved out a whole area that ultimately the developer agreed to put under conservation restriction. And add trails and this and that, and all kinds of other things that are not in the zoning. It's just part of the negotiation, and it's spelled out in the LDA, the land. The flip side of that is that comes back to the question, the comment that somebody made half an hour or so ago about trust. That doesn't really add to the vote, in my experience, the voter's comfort level. And I've seen over the years, in my experience, a lot of cases where it was, you need to trust us, and we need to have this flexibility, end up worst case nightmare stuff in the voters' minds, with the result that a zoning change and ultimately a project behind it was defeated. So it's a very dicey balancing act, if you will, in my experience.
Right, and I don't think this
we
is
should go
asking
there
people
and
just
say,
to trust
"Trust
me.
us."
It's gonna go back to town meeting.
I never trust
Get
someone
actual
with the first words out of their mouth, it's trust me.
If I went back to Greg's analogy about the ship, it's actually not trust us to get to the final destination. It's actually trust us to unmoor the ship, take it outside the harbor, and if we get far enough offshore that we don't like how it's running, we'll turn around and come back. So you only have to trust us enough to let us unmoor it and take it out of the harbor. We think we're going to a certain
Right, we're
destination.
not gonna crash this thing on the rocks.
Right, we are not gonna crash it on the rocks, but we actually can turn around and come back at this point.
But
And
you
I
have to
think that's
show them, not
important
tell
in
them.
development, you always have to be willing to know what your, or your, where your bottom line is, where you're not gonna go any farther, so where you might turn around, so.
To me, the important thing here is to not overstate what we're asking voters to do. Because to put it, the way I see it at least, if the zoning article doesn't pass, the master plan's gone. And so it's not an issue of not only do we want your zoning, but you're also somehow or another implicitly choosing who the developer is going to be and what the development is going to be. You're not doing that. You're just enabling us to take this to a point where we expect to get responsive proposals back that will let us then look at that, let the warrant committee look at that, and have better infrastructure costs. If we overstate what we're asking people to do, or if we take a long time to do it, I just see that as a delay, because this is a pretty straightforward, Mike, I think you have a different view, I guess, but this piece of it's pretty straightforward, because it's only setting up the possibility of doing something. It's not putting anything on the railroad tracks yet.
No, I don't disagree with that, but it's excluding other possibilities, and it is committing the town to a complete redevelopment of the entire, as I call it, the $500 million solution to the $25 million problem. It's committing us to that.
Well, yeah.
As opposed to figuring out what's the minimal amount of development we need to do to pay for the cost of the buildings, which is another way to look at it. And again, that's why this is a legislative judgment for the town meeting to make. And I'm now convinced that I think we should do it on November 18th. Mark's absence notwithstanding. And if it gets voted down because people think we don't have enough information, then, that's what happens.
And you're gonna blame Mark.
I won't blame, no, you won't be there. You won't be there to blame.
Easy to blame.
In that sense, I agree. I think this is time for us to figure out.
I think we should talk about
whether
Pete's
we're into
suggested
this.
changes, because we have to come out of tonight with a final.
Well, we don't. We have till the 15th of October to come up with the finals, right?
No, because if it's gonna go in the paper and then go to the planning board, we have to be done. I'm not gonna
The
participate
paper's
in
not
another
gonna have the
discussion of the
deep.
zoning.
Yeah, the paper's gonna have a summary of it, and then those changes can actually be discussed with the planning board at the public hearing.
Yeah, I don't think we
But-
should keep talking about it after tonight. So
And the
I think
only
we
other
should talk
thing-
about these changes and.
I know we wanted to wrap down, the only other thing I wanted to clarify is if the master planning committee would be willing to meet with me and maybe come up with a marketing plan that we could, bring to the selectmen, yeah? Okay. I'll circle back tomorrow with you guys.
Mr. Chairman, I want to point out I've submitted something like 20 comments.
Right.
I would also point out that although a couple of them change some of the allowed uses in some of the areas, in general, the changes are to bring consistency from one section of the plan to another, and to raise questions about some of the design guidelines and everything else. So there's approximately 20 questions that I've submitted to Sarah, and I believe Sarah submitted them to McCabe. So
So Mike, I'm gonna suggest we not try to process Bill's 20 and Pete's 10. Because I do think we have time before we have to finalize it. Would it help any for us to simply commit tonight that we're not interested in making any changes that would introduce fundamental changes? We're not re-engineering the master plan. What we're doing is we're looking at, I think Pete, some of yours had to do with, is it an N or a yes or a PB in a box? And that's something that we could process outside of this larger meeting with this many people.
Refinements and technical changes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what I would like then, I think we already agreed on that on Thursday, that we weren't gonna make those changes tonight. And if we wanna further agree tonight, we won't make those changes a different night, that's fine. What I would like then, if possible, from Sarah or Kathy, is as to Bill's list of changes and Pete's list of changes, which ones are significant and which ones are sort of technical wordsmithing changes. And from my perspective, I'm a no on any changes of substance, one way or the other, unless Bill caught some nit with respect to the LDA that was missed. Other than that, I'm sort of a no on any substantive changes. If they are, minor changes, I'm indifferent to which way we go. So I think that would be helpful from a technical perspective. I think some of these are maybe not fundamental, but very substantive changes to the master plan in the preferred scenario, some of which a year and a half ago I favored and still favor in substance, but it's too late, in my view, to make any of those kind of changes. But I would like to know that technical answer as to what it is.
Okay, well, we can, Sarah and I can look that over and get responses.
And I'd like answers to my questions or comments or that were related to the actual words and descriptions of things, and like, for example, the design guidelines, like the footprint, some of the footprint areas and everything else, which are not changes I think I made 3 changes, or suggested changes, to the actual master plan itself, to the diagram of the zoning and the table for, you know, what the uses were. But all of the rest of the changes were questions like, why is this, why is that? Did the planning board agree to a 180-day schedule that they can, so I'd like to see those questions answered, or at least get a comment back on those. And it's not unreasonable.
And I don't
Well,
Let me finish.
Bill, you've had many, many bites at the apple.
I have, but I will tell you that for the majority of these things, I made several suggestions. I probably made over 100 comments to this appendix back in 2018, and the majority of them were incorporated. For example, the response period for the planning board was 120 days, and I asked where that 120 days came from, if that wasn't an artifact or a remnant of the 40R language. It was taken out. So there are some things that I had suggested before that were not taken out. I'd like them to be looked at. I'd like to know if the planning board is committed to do an expedited turnaround of 180 days. I would ask that you read those questions and please respond. If not, I'll bring them up at the town meeting. That's not the place to do this. This is the place to have those kinds of discussions.
So I think what I'm hearing here is Sarah and Kathy and Jen, if you want to join in here on this. If you take Bill's 20 and Pete's 10, I think I'm with Mike as far as making changes. Anything that's discretionary and minor and sounds like a good idea, then I think we ought to look at changing it. Anything that's substantive, we shouldn't. My own personal bias is anything that leaves as much flexibility as we can get within, you know, is better than things that restrict things unnecessarily. So that's my view. But if the 2 of you can, or the 3 of you can review and come back to us with your inputs on what you think we should do, then we'd be in a position to, I will say that Bill usually asks intelligent questions, so without necessarily having evaluated every one of them, generally he asks questions that are, if nothing else, ones that would probably be of interest to us as well, so.
I mean, we'd be happy to. I will say, I just want to stress, this is a balanced plan. There were a lot of compromises, and there was a lot of consideration as to housing units and costs to the municipal budget, particularly the education costs. So some development might look, more development may on the face look better, but there was a balancing, because we know with development there are education costs. So we've tried to balance it, and from a lot of different perspectives, from the open space and built perspective, from being mindful of historic preservation, being mindful of historic tax credits as a significant cash flow for the project. So there's a series of balances that, you know, it's kind of like the doughboy. If you push it, you might punch out somewhere else where you don't expect it, so.
Maybe, I'm looking at some of Pete's, and I think they had to do with specific entries in the table.
We're happy to
So
look
it
at
sounds
all
like
of
that's.
them.
And those were designed to give the town itself greater flexibility, so that if in 50 years, 100 years, the town decides something
Right.
different with respect to the state hospital project, then it doesn't have to go and get the 2/3 vote to change the zoning. At that point, it can just do a special permit
Yeah.
through the planning board to do that.
So, we good? We good? We're good on that, okay.
So can I just refresh the dates? Have we made some decisions? We're going to look at an October 2nd planning board meeting
Mhm.
to be confirmed, but the week of September 30th, not on a holiday and not on a select board meeting. We're looking at November 18th, is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think having more time is good. I'm in favor of that.
Yeah.
I still like January 13, but it sounds like I'm in a minority.
Well,
He is.
okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next.
All in favor of January 13?
You don't have a second. Forget it.
So we're talking about October 2nd. Can we do anything at Medfield Day?
sold out.
I can put up at least the master plan at the townwide master planning committee's booth, just so it's on display, but, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so,
I'll just-
that's gonna be a display,
yeah.
and that's Sarah, and that's then local media and social media, the state hospital committee is going to work with Sarah, Brandy, Lucille, Gail, and everyone. You're gonna help with the marketing plan, the communication committee gurus. Okay? So I'm gonna put Sarah plus. And we also said we would work on some of the handouts, so. Public forum, who's taking the lead on the public forum?
I would actually think the same, that should all be part of that marketing plan.
But Gus, you're gonna take the lead in scheduling it and being there and
I
convening
think that
it.
should be part of the marketing plan. I have no, I'm happy to be there, I'm happy to participate, but I would like that to have some coherence with the marketing plan. So I'd rather have you do it that way rather than me put the forum together. If you're telling me you want me to design a forum, I got a problem with
No,
that.
convene, which is
Well,
different.
what does that mean?
Be there and lead it.
You're
I will
gonna
be there. If you,
and-
if the marketing group wants me to lead that forum, you should know by now, I'm more than happy to lead forums, because I've done several of them. If that's what you're asking for, but I also don't want to, Pete also, I don't mean to just crowd you out, but I'm happy to do
Very
that.
happy to participate.
What I don't want to do is, I don't want to basically say, okay, you've got the forum, let us know when you're doing it. That's not where I want to go. But,
Team effort,
Yeah,
communication. So,
and again, I
Together.
don't preclude either of my colleagues from participating.
Get the view from the marketing people on that one, too.
Yeah. Okay?
Sarah and Joanna, what do you need for the warrant committee?
Who are we providing our comments to?
Just to the town meeting.
No, well, in a previous slide, you had said we needed to have comments by October 7th.
I would bring it to the select board as the sponsors of the warrant article.
I think you're not expected to comment on the warrant article, other than an up or down recommendation to town
Up or down
meeting.
recommendation?
No,
Okay.
we'll be responsible for the text of it, and then you'll do what you usually do.
So we just need to get our vote to Christine. You'll let us know when you need our.
But if you have comments that are go way in that might affect some of the wording or implicit policy within the zoning, it would be better to weigh in during the planning board
Sure.
review process, so those changes might be able to be.
So Martha and I will be the liaisons on this, similar to
So-
what we do with, department heads. We'll go to whatever meetings we can, meet with whatever. And then
Okay.
we'll then coordinate with the warrant committee in terms of
Okay,
what our.
so once when you know when you're meeting on this, let us know.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you guys should plan on coming to the October 2nd planning board hearing.
And then special town meeting is now the 18th. Okay? So is everyone comfortable and have what they need to move forward? Is anyone not, Brandy?
On that public forum that I guess we're now, the communications subcommittee is handling, what are we putting out to the public that night? Are you preparing the agenda, or?
I think we would work with you on that. We'd have,
I'm also happy to work with you on it. I don't want to take the ball and run with it, but I'm happy to, because I have a view of the education side of this is what I'm worried about. And I know you are too.
So it's an educational meeting?
It's an education. I think it's setting expectations for the context of the decision that the taxpayers make. I think there's a piece of this that, and I'll look to the development committee, because you've been really good at anticipating what some of the hard-nosed financial, not that we have exact numbers, but what some of the questions we ought to be prepared to answer in a meeting like this that are around the financial practicality. And I think that's got to get worked into this, so.
I agree, and I think
yeah.
others on the committee would feel strongly about wanting to continue to
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
role.
Right.
Randy, I know you're wearing two hats because you're now on the Water and Sewer Board. Is there anything that Water and Sewer may want to weigh in on this?
I think we'd like to take a look at the results of that engineering study and understand that.
Randy, you might not know yet, but
No, I probably don't.
I'll break the news to you that the development committee and PAR would like to schedule a joint meeting with the Water and Sewer Board in the next couple of weeks. So we're gonna actually get to scheduling on that.
One on the 13th,
Okay.
schedule already.
Yeah, it's on my to-do list post vacation.
Could someone let us know when that is, because the warrant committee would probably want to attend that as well.
No,
It'll be posted on the
17th.
website, right, town website. Oh.
17th. You gotta be
But
there.
that's not the joint meeting, to my knowledge, but we haven't been given any dates that you
No,
guys are.
we got a date on it.
Oh, you do?
Okay.
Yeah, we have a date, we're
Okay.
gonna meet. I'm sure you'll be welcome to come along.
Well, we know
So,
some people will be
Maybe
there.
Randy and Todd can look at their calendars afterwards.
I'll circle around with that tomorrow too.
Does anyone have any, Christine, is there anything else you need from all of us?
Nope.
Sarah?
I'm in good shape right now. I've got some questions answered. I appreciate it.
Will you do as you did during the master plan committee, update those slides and make them
We will,
available?
we're happy to update we're happy to show the slides and make the changes. And I'll send it to Sarah, so
Great.
thank you for
Thank you.
the reminder. Mark, do you need anything from all of us?
No, I'm more here as a resource for you folks.
Okay, we just wanna make sure.
I mean, I did have a few little technical tweaks on the amendment. If somebody wants to look at them, fine. If not,
Be happy to look at them.
Yeah, I would too.
Thank you.
they're
Okay,
nothing
I'm
that I
gonna
need.
turn it back to you,
Thank you,
Gus.
Kathy.
I'm done.
Thanks,
for your
Jen.
time.
Thank you, Sarah.
That was good,
And
thanks.
thanks, everyone, for being here and for this, having this many people in a room and actually getting to a conclusion and a discussion within 2 hours is probably a rare event. So, thanks to everyone for that. We will, for those who have heard about how entertaining selectmen's meetings are, you're more than welcome to stay as long as you'd like, but for anyone who is finished and wants to leave, we're going to proceed with the meeting, but.
Just leave your cards there. I'll pick them up. Thanks, though.
Right.
If we can
Okay,
take, yeah, if you can take Sarah's, the two contracts first. Sarah's on the agenda, and then we can.
Yep, so first item on the agenda was Sarah's request that we vote to sign the peer review, design review and peer engineering contract for Stephen A. Hyken.
Yes, so for the Rose Bay project, the ZBA procured a design review consultant and an engineering consultant. Both contracts were signed and the applicant submitted the deposit checks
Okay,
today.
any questions, comments?
No, so moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, approved. Okay, that one's done. Second contract is the MSHDC environmental contract. And that one,
That should be in your packet.
it is in the
also.
package.
Yeah, it's in the packet. Yeah.
Any questions from? Where'd Bill go? Bill's gone. There he is. Bill actually had some questions. I'm not sure whether we did talk about it. Pete, did you have any questions on the contract? The only question I had on the contract is there's the contract that's our form, and there was also, I'm guessing it's the contract that the consultant submitted.
Yeah,
We're not doing the consultant's contract, we're doing our contract.
Yes.
Okay, that's the only question I had.
Yeah, our contract supersedes the consultant's contract.
Is this the environmental?
This is the environmental contract. Did you had some questions?
Yeah, I had a whole bunch of them. I mean, I'll summarize as best I can. So I read the scope of work, which is basically a 4-line scope of work, Exhibit A, and then we're talking about the Hellman contract, right?
Yep.
And so my first question was, full interior abatement remediation of hazardous materials, including disposal. My question was, I wasn't sure about why you're getting an estimate for interior abatement and remediation when the master plan consultant has deemed that all of the reused buildings were gut rehab. So I'm just curious as to what we're,
So I can answer that. At our meetings, we've talked about other information that the voters might find useful, including, for example, the so-called mothball scenario. And so, if you go back to annual town meeting and you look at what we requested be approved, you'll find that there is clear language in there saying we want to go and get this kind of information that would include remediation of the buildings. So this is really intended in some ways in two situations. One, the preferred scenario doesn't come to pass, but this would be useful information for the town to have. And secondarily, if the preferred scenario does move forward and the developer is doing this remediation, not the town, it gives the town some reasonable, basis of information, point of comparison.
all right, so I did mention that as one of my possible reasons why you might be doing it. All right, my other question was, what is complete takedown? So you asking them for a demolition quote as well? It says complete takedown of the building.
That's correct.
So you already have one quote, so you're asking them to get a second
No,
quote?
we asked for a proposal along these scope of work, and we had one firm just give us a cost for takedown of the buildings, and not the scope of work that we had requested, which would include these other pieces.
So are you saying that what was my understanding, again, since I haven't been party to the information that you're getting, and John Thompson and I have only been concerned about demolition and hazardous materials now for 10 years, but I can understand why you wouldn't want to give us scopes of work or bids or quotes that come back from suppliers. So if you're saying that you did not get I can't believe that the quote you got previously did not consider or did not cover extracting the hazardous material and disposing of it separately.
No, that's not what I said. What I said was the scope of work that we were looking for as a committee, which included the remediation piece, which we talked about in your prior question, as well as demolition and removal of materials. The quote that you're referring to only addressed that latter piece. And
Demolition and removal.
Right. And so we did not feel as a committee that proposal, which was to do the work, not to advise the committee, or give us information or work with us in any kind of ongoing way, but was simply a price to do work that we weren't asking to be done right now, was responsive to what we had requested. And that's why we went to Hillman, which is the third firm we talked to get this proposal.
All right, as long as you understand that to demolish a building, the person who is demolishing the building will have to separate the contaminated material and hazardous material and put it in a separate pile. Otherwise, the cost that you got would have been understated by a factor of about 10. Because the disposition costs and the disposal costs and the shipping of the material out, if you contaminated the whole pile of everything you've demolished, is way beyond any price that you've got there. So just as long as the committee is clear, I would very strongly suggest that you touch base with John Thompson to find out what you're actually getting back, or what you do get back, and what effort that this gentleman does. The other one I would point out is
So before you go there, we agree with that, and we want to continue to use.
I'm just trying to help.
Right, but I just want to make sure you're aware that we walked the site with John, with some of these firms, Sarah included. So this isn't something the committee's doing in a vacuum.
Well, I'm sorry John left, because I ran my questions through him, and he pretty much agreed that they were good questions. So I think
Well, he didn't provide you with the answers, which is what we're doing,
He
so.
probably would have liked to have heard
I
your
saw John today
response.
too, and, I've been talking to John all summer long. We've been walking the site. The quote that Select Demo gave the town of Medfield was not what we asked for. We wanted a building-by-building summary of remediation costs and demolition costs, so we could factor into the analysis that the development committee is working on. We didn't want a demo quote. We didn't ask for a demo quote. It was a misunderstanding.
Well, it says
what's the difference
it says
between what we
complete
asked for and what we
demolition and
got, though?
disposal of all hazardous materials.
A building-by-building summary.
That's
So-
not what the scope of work says. I'm sorry, you understand,
Well,
all I can
I
read
know,
is
and
the
you
scope of
weren't at the
work.
meeting last Wednesday where Hillman was present. So I'm trying to tell you that there was a clear understanding about what the next steps are.
a verbal understanding and a written contract?
I mean, it sounds,
I mean, I may be silly, but I mean, I've had $100 million contracts and $200 million contracts, and there's usually a scope of work that defines what the work is. My only question was, I'm not challenging your answer, I'm just saying it's a reasonable question. Are you asking him to give you a demolition quote, total demolition quote? And if you are, why is it all of the buildings?
it's broken down by building by building.
Not in the scope of work. The scope,
Yeah,
I'm
okay,
just-
no, I mean,
Sarah, I'm just challenging the words and the
Right, but,
legal document.
can I ask another question, just a question? So we sent out a request, we got a response from Select Demo that, hey, it's just a number,
yes,
correct?
correct.
On a napkin practically.
Yeah, a number, okay? And you want more detail behind the number.
That's correct.
Right.
And we also want numbers that relate to remediation, not demolition and removal.
Yeah.
Okay. But it seems like then you'll have two data points. You'll have the data point you got from Select Demo, which is the data point for taking everything down. Is that what they bid on?
Yeah, and
What did they
John,
say it was?
The consultant from Hillman will work with
No,
Select Demo.
start with Select Demo. They
Yeah.
gave a bid, right?
Yeah,
And what did they say the bid was for?
To actually do the work.
yeah,
Yeah, but for what? 1 building, 10 buildings, 6 buildings?
all complete demo.
Complete demo. Okay, so
Yeah.
now we have a data point that we can present to the voters. Okay,
Yes.
this is what one person said they would do to take down all the buildings. And you want a second data point that's gonna have more detail behind it.
Well, and I
Yes.
would say on both data points, we want to know prevailing wage versus non-prevailing wage, depending on who's
You
commissioning
didn't
the
get enough
work,
detail in the
which is-
first one,
which
and
is
you
what
wanted more
this
detail
says.
in the second one.
Yeah,
And I think, Bill, is your concern that they're just gonna ignore the first one?
No.
Because they don't like the number, or you like the number, or is that the concern?
No,
Or
I'm
what's
just.
the substantive concern?
I just wanted to understand if they are in fact duplicating things, what the rationale was for duplicating those things, and that I thought that the statement of work was very vague.
Right, but I think we've got, first of all, it's a $7,100 contract, right?
Correct.
So it's
Well,
relative-
Gene might question whether $7,500 is a fair amount of money, given how hard she had to work to get the $25,000 for the pocket park.
is she?
I didn't ask her, I'm just saying that,
Well, you just threw it out there.
well, that's the other, Gene is gonna hate me for this, but again, are we going to pay for that quote for the building that we're going to be leasing to Gene? That's the other issue.
But again, so it's $7,500, we're now gonna have two pieces of information about the demolition costs. Right? That's what we're gonna have.
Again, I wasn't looking for World War III, I was looking for.
No, I'm
some
just trying to
explanation of
understand
was
what it-
going on,
right?
that's all.
We didn't, as I said, we didn't feel comfortable with the information that Select Demo gave us. It wasn't responsive to the totality of what we asked for. It was literally one piece of paper. You can kind of query whether, if you actually were putting it out to bid, whether if Select Demo was not able to bid at that time, whether the numbers that would come in would have any relationship to that piece of paper. So, we're just seeking information.
And I acknowledge that there was some value to that. If you've seen, I gave you a copy of what my questions were, so. Fine,
Good,
you will.
okay. Any comments? further? Motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye, okay. I will thank Bill for his public citizen scrutiny of all of our contracts, though. Appreciate that. Let's see, next, I think next one is John McKaylee, you're up. You,
Why don't you just grab a seat and move
it's
it
probably
forward?
better up there just so you can look at us, but
Yeah, that's
wherever
what
you'd like.
I was-
That's
yeah.
kinda-
They need the microphone.
We don't usually meet in this big a room, it feels kind
Yeah,
of
no, I
cavernous.
understand.
I already had to apologize because we actually locked him out of the building,
Oh,
so.
oh, that's even worse, okay.
Apparently they locked the doors at 8 o'clock at the high school.
Why don't we let you start?
Sure. Should I start with all of the background? I don't know how much you've had a chance to.
You
review the
sent,
paper.
we received both the letter that you had sent to Mo on December 2nd,
Right.
and then the request that you sent in to us on June 26th. So I think we have a basic understanding of the fundamental situation. Personally, I know I'll have some questions about
Sure.
specifics around this. I guess if you have anything to start with that you'd like to say, we'll let you do that. Otherwise, maybe we just start asking questions, but.
Yeah, I mean, do you want me to summarize without going into all of the details, just so everybody's on the same page, or feel free to start with questions?
Why don't we start with questions? We'll start with questions.
It's pretty self-explanatory, right, the letters?
The information you provide is pretty self-explanatory.
Okay.
Do either of you have questions?
Go ahead.
Was the damaged property in the public right of way, or was it on your property?
It's on our property. The sidewalk is on the other side of the street, and there's only a curb that separates our property from the cul-de-sac.
Actually, there is a right-of-way that goes around on your property.
It is
there?
in the public right-of-way.
It's on the right-of-way.
The public right-of-way goes about 8 feet from the curb.
Maybe for the benefit, to the extent there's anybody at home, somebody should at least give some.
Yeah, maybe I'm not familiar.
Let me try
Sure,
this.
sure,
Let
sure.
me try summarizing, and you should feel free to correct any parts of it that I described. My understanding is 2 winters ago, you have a walk that goes straight down from your front of your house all the way down to the curb on Quarry Road.
Yes.
2 winters ago, in the course of snow plowing, the snow plow, and I would say the curbs you have are not the normal square vertical curbs, but they're 45-degree curbs, which act as wedges on plows, which just happens to be the way the road's set up. Two winters ago, the plow hit some stones on your walk. I think you repaired the stones on your own on that one. Then last winter, you sent Mo Goulet a letter on December 2nd, basically saying, gee, I already am worried that you're going to damage my walk again. I want you to give you a heads up that I don't want you hitting my walk with the plow. Over the course of the winter, with the different snowstorms, the plow nonetheless still hit the walk and cracked, I think, 2 of the stones that were on, the border stones that were on the end of the walk. Based on that, you initially filed a claim or asked Mo to cover the repair to the walk. This time around, Mo initially agreed to a couple $100 to cover the repair to the stones at the end of the walk. When you went to the contractor, and the contractor that you were talking to went to, I think it was 2 supply stores.
3, but yeah.
3 supply stores. At that point in time, the stones that would be the replacement stones were not available. And I think in the letter you sent us, you actually said they're actually they don't make them anymore.
They don't make that specific color code anymore.
Yeah,
Correct.
so based on that, what you then went back to Mo and asked for was a significant amount more money for the town to completely replace the border on your front walk, going all the way up to your house, at which point Mo said, now I'm not in a position to prove that. If you want that extra money, you're gonna have to come to the selectmen.
So I would add a few points to that.
Okay.
One is that, and this is just, I think the first point is just to show you that I think we're being quite reasonable in the sense that the walkway is completely blocked all winter long because the plow just piles snow up in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we just understood that's one of the things you have to deal with when you live at the end of a cul-de-sac. Rather than complaining about that, we just use the walkway that goes from the driveway, the second walkway, to the back door. Okay, so it's completely unusable for probably 5 months because the snow is piled high. The other point that I would make is that
could I ask one quick question about that? Because I actually see this as 2 issues. The snow that's on your walk, is that like deliberately focused? Are you just saying it's plowed high because there's a bank of snow all the way around the cul-de-sac? Or are you saying for some reason all the snow from the cul-de-sac or a significant amount just gets dropped onto your front walk? So
good question. So no, it's not deliberate, but I do think that there are places that they could put that snow that wouldn't be blocking our walkway.
The pile of snow at your walkway is higher than the pile of snow everywhere else.
Could be put somewhere else. I think and when I originally sent that letter to Maurice, I said I'd be helpful to walk with the foreman and you on our property to sort of talk about other places they could put that snow at that time. And that's in the original letter as well. The other thing that I would say is that there are far more than 2 border stones damaged. And those pictures were intended to help you. So there are pavers that are between the border stones, and then there are the border stones, okay? The pavers are not an issue because they have them in stock and they can replace them. The border stones are the issue where they no longer have a supply, and they talked to 3 suppliers. There are a few that are completely broken, but there are many that are damaged. And so the idea here is, if they were just to replace those with the next closest color, it would look kind of like a checkerboard. And so what I'm asking is that, because there are a number of them, that they replace the entire border with that new color. It's close enough that it wouldn't contrast with the regular pavers. But when you have both colors next to each other, and I tried to supply some photos that would show that, it doesn't look good. And the other concession that I'm willing to make, and you may not see this as a concession, but I do, is that I'm not asking the town to replace the border stones on the other walkway that goes from the driveway, right? So now I'll have 2 walkways with 2 different colored border stones, but because they are separated by grass, you wouldn't notice it. But when it's on one walkway, you would. So.
Okay. Any questions?
So I'm looking at these photos that I assume that you took and sent in.
Yes.
No, yeah, I don't know if you took them or
I
Maurice
think
took them.
those
I
were
don't
my
know.
guys took those.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I supplied some photos to
Okay.
Christine as well.
So-
Yeah, those are in the packet.
But what I'm seeing is it looks like there are 2 stones that are out of place.
There are 2 stones that we actually lifted out of the holes, but there are a lot more stones that are damaged. And as I said, I have close-up photos to show you that.
And are all those stones that are damaged, the ones that are adjacent to the asphalt pavement of the street?
No, there are others along the grass as well.
How did those get damaged by the plow?
Well, the plow, I mean,
So if you go to your street, when this first came up, I drove there because I was trying to see what it was, and at first, I couldn't spot it when I first drove, but what I did notice is that on the curb, because it's not a normal curb, it's a 45-degree curb.
Yeah.
There is a brown line halfway up that curb, all the way down the street, which I assume is, the curb acts like a wedge on a snowplow, and it looks like the snowplow gets lifted about halfway up the rock, and then the rust line scrapes off, because if you look at your street, you'll see there's this brown line halfway up the curb, virtually the entire length of the street. So I think what it boils down to is the curb there is actually designed to be a wedge to lift anything, instead of a curb which normally blocks something, this is something that actually lifts it up to set it up to work that way.
I mean, so
That's not your fault, it's just the way it works.
The answer to Mr. Peterson's question is that they are adjacent to some of those other stones, and when the plow hit them, they basically, it was a domino effect, right? So they bang up against
one next to it
stones.
and,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
okay, all right.
The other thing is that I am very diligent about putting the reflective markers on the lawn as far as possible close to the stone, so that so to prevent this exact thing from happening, right? So, you know, I think the other piece is that I paid, and I don't have the invoice here, but I'd be happy to supply it, around $700 a year before, as you stated, to repair it on my own. I just don't feel that we should have to keep going into our pockets every year to replace this.
Did you repair that same area on this walkway?
Yes, it was very similar. It might not have been the exact same stones, but it was similar.
So as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking that it's a design defect, that your pavers are too high, because you've got a granite curb there, and if the plow's gonna go up over the granite curb, it's gonna scrape anything that is above the granite curb. But if you installed your pavers below that granite curb, then I can't imagine that they would get damaged by the plow.
Keep in mind also that our walkway was constructed before this curb was put in.
Oh.
This property was built almost 6 years ago, and then the street was, when the construction of the entire development was finished, was paved, and the curb was put in and the sidewalk was put in across the street. Again, after we had built our house and the walkway was put in.
Oh, okay.
Well, as part of the overall construction of the development, you're saying? In
So-
other words, the road went in, you weren't living on a dirt road or something?
No, but it was repaved
And
put
it
the
wasn't
final
paved
coat
well,
down.
it wasn't
Yeah.
full asphalt, you know, the way you see it today. It was rougher, and then there was no curb there, and there was no sidewalk on the other side. They put that all in after the last house was completed.
So you're saying the walk has been in for how many years?
The walk has been in since September of 2013. And the
So
road
for
wasn't completed.
For 6 years, and so 4 of those years, you didn't have any problem at all?
No. We have not had a problem until the winter before the last winter.
I'm sorry,
Is that when they put the curb in? Yes.
That was my question.
but the developer put the curb in, the
Right.
town did not put the curb in.
Right, no, that's right.
Well, it's
I
Cape
know we didn't
Cod,
put the
it's
curb.
Cape, apparently from what you described, it's called Cape Cod berm.
It's
and
a slope,
typical-
it's a sloped granite curb.
Sloped granite.
Yeah.
And I'm
Which-
not
which-
sure if that's what the planning board rules and regs require, or he got a waiver to do that.
I wasn't here when it was developed, but, you know, usually it's approved beforehand if that's in the subdivision rules and regs. I'm not sure where Sarah is, but, sloped granite
She wasn't
is,
here when they did it either.
has been an accepted, curbing in a lot of different subdivisions.
Like, yeah, in the good weather, I can see how it looks nice, because the grass just comes down, it's a nice smooth thing, but it effectively,
It's
it
less
completely
expensive.
undermines the purpose of a curb.
It's less expensive than perpendicular.
From granite curbing, it is less.
Who was the developer? Scott Caldwell.
Scott Caldwell.
So your house was put up as part of the overall development, it's just this all occurred over, I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, sure.
This was all part of the development, it's just that the actual curb and the paving didn't come in until late, after you'd already moved in.
Correct.
So I think the paving, what the pavement is they put the binder course down, which is the base material, and then what you experience with the next paving is the top course, which is the surface riding course on top of that.
Sure.
So-
I don't know the technical terms.
Yep.
I just know that the road was
this the one that
finished.
took
and
us
the
like
curb was-
4 shots at town meeting to get the right-of-way accepted?
Uh-huh.
That's this one.
Yep.
And which portion of this is in the right-of-way on the pictures?
It's about 8 feet from the slope granite to the back, 8 feet from the, I have,
Yeah, I think there's a picture here that shows where the fire hydrant is, and the fire hydrant is within the right of way.
So the whole thing is in the right-of-way?
The
No,
layout,
just
it's within
8
the
feet of it,
layout.
the last 8 feet of it.
No, but all the stuff that's broken.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's all within the right of way.
So that's
slope
4
granite
feet.
curbing is right here.
Right.
This
Yeah, and then
property.
it goes to the other side.
Where are the broken?
It's gonna be somewhere around here.
I will
yeah.
admit, if all of the broken stones are within 8 feet of the curb.
So part of why I wanted to make sure we had this discussion, and it's not first and foremost for you. I had a friend who lived on Quarry Road who talked to me probably 6 years ago about his mailbox being knocked down. He had good granite post mailbox, and he had come to the town looking for a reimbursement. And at the time, he was a friend of mine, and I was kind of shocked that the town wasn't picking up the repairs that were required there. And I didn't understand all of this stuff until this complaint came in and I learned more. You put, the walk you have extends into the right-of-way, the town's right-of-way. So effectively, you're putting a walk in the town right-of-way. If it was done before everything was finished off, or if the developer did it, however it worked, my guess is that you didn't get permission from the town to put an installation in on the town right-of-way. I would be surprised if you had. Second, my guess is that you didn't request that the town assume responsibility for maintaining the walk. So basically what we have now is a situation where you're coming to the town looking for the town to pay for the repair for your walk. It's interesting to me that the walk was up for 6 years before you had a problem 2 years ago. When you had the problem 2 years ago.
So it was 4 years before we had a problem, because it's been 6
Yeah,
years.
yeah, it was up for 6 years before you had a problem 2 years ago, so it was
Yeah.
somehow or another, either we had light snow winters or
And
it didn't
maybe when-
happen.
Maybe when they put the binder course down, it raised it up that much higher.
I will tell
Yeah,
you, if you remember the winter of a few years ago, it was before this was put in,
Mhm.
and we didn't have a problem that winter. That was one of the worst winters I think we've had on history, right?
Mhm. So the issue is, when you did the repair 2 years ago, did you do anything to change the walk? Or did you just repair it?
No, I did.
You just put it back in the way it
I just
was?
put it back exactly the way it was before.
So then in the second winter, you're coming to us asking for the money to repair the walk.
In advance.
Well, it doesn't matter if you're doing something in advance, trying to tell the town they can't do something on their right of way. And so that the fact that it's in advance is nice, but it doesn't change anything in my mind, at least. I'm not a lawyer. If we repair it again, what happens next year?
Well, this is why I was trying to have the other conversation around putting the snow, trying to get the snow away from that walkway. And actually, there's a lot of room, because we're next to the house that's at the end of the cul-de-sac.
Mhm.
And in front of that house, their driveway is all the way to the other side. So
Yeah.
between these two driveways,
Yeah.
there's a lot of space.
Yeah, so, I mean, so that piece I'm sympathetic for sure. If we're just putting a big pile of snow somewhere on a cul-de-sac, it seems like you could put it 30 degrees to the left, well, probably not the right, because that's where your driveway is. But
I think I mean, in a perfect world, that's a great thing to do.
Yeah.
When you're out there during a snowstorm, it's very difficult to ask everybody to do something different in every part of town, because we get requests everywhere. We don't want snow here, you can put it over here, you can do this, you can do that. It's very difficult for us to do that, especially with the amount of people that we have, the amount of snow that we have to remove. And I'm sympathetic to that, but I don't think they purposely put it in one spot or anything. They're trying to find an area where they can push it off the street and push it back far enough so you can get to your mailboxes and everything else in every roadway. One thing that we try to do is push back during snowstorms, because if we have another snowstorm on top of another, like we did that year, your road gets smaller and smaller and it gets narrower and narrower. So
what I couldn't figure out, though, is on that cul-de-sac, you're not like, if it was 180 degrees into the cul-de-sac, it would make sense, but you're canted off to the right. So I'm just trying to figure out why that particular spot right at the end of Walk.
I don't think the snow's all piled up there. It's just when they push the snow in the cul-de-sac, they push it wherever they're plowing. Okay, there's no driveway there. The walkway is covered by the time the guys are out there plowing, so they don't even see a walkway.
But there is a front door there. I mean,
I understand that, but
but
some just go out the front door and it goes to the driveway. It doesn't even come down to the street. But nevertheless, they don't.
But the thing is I actually have reflective markers
on
my lawn that actually outline the walkways, and so I'm trying to let them know exactly where our.
But again, it's very difficult, especially, I mean, come out at 2 o'clock in the morning and see a snowstorm, and it's not that easy just to say, well, that's a walkway, we gotta make sure it's here, make sure it's there. I am sympathetic to what happened, and like I said, we talked, I visited you, we talked about this, I agreed to help you out with that, but when it was the whole border, I just couldn't justify that to the taxpayers.
So let me tell you, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm learning this stuff. What I think I understand, first off, on a legal basis, you have no basis for a claim at all. And so part of the issue here is the town, we don't want the town to suddenly pick up the responsibility for repairing unilateral installations on rights of way. Well, the reason we have a right of way is so the town can do what the town needs to do. And so the idea of setting a precedent that whatever damage people suffer on a town right of way that they installed on their own without getting any commitment from the town whatsoever, I don't think that's a precedent that we should be starting. There's no legal basis, as far as I can tell. There's no legal basis for it at all.
But from a resident standpoint, who purchased this from a developer who is a third generation developer, they've been building in this town for, 60 years or so. Mm-hmm. I would have assumed that he would have received the town's permission to build whatever. I mean, I'm just saying from my perspective, I would never know that.
Sure. That's an issue between you and the developer. The real point I'm making, because I think the town doesn't have any particular reason to want to prevent people from doing anything to a right of way, but to me, Pete may be right that lowering the walk is a permanent solution, but then what you have is a little lip on the curb for people to trip over. You have to figure out what you want to do to change the design of your walk to make that not be a recurring problem. To me, maybe ending the walk a foot shy of the curb in the first place so that there's grass there makes your problem go away permanently. What I see right now, though, is that, well, I paid for it once, I don't want to pay for it again, I think the town should pay for it, and if it happens again, we're gonna have this conversation in a year. And my view, and I'm only one of three, my view is the town doesn't have, I wouldn't have known this until just this summer, the town does not have a legal obligation to fix things that residents put on the town right of way. So that's, from a legal standpoint, that's kind of where I think
if
we're
we-
sitting.
You know, in terms of a concession, we could probably ask you to take it out of the right of way entirely. See,
Take what out?
the walk. Right, if it's in the
That's,
town.
that's correct.
Yeah, if it's in the town right away, just from a legal perspective, you know, you can ask people to remove stuff that's in the right of way. And when we've had this issue, we had this issue with a basketball hoop.
But that's another precedent, right? I mean, you're
Right,
talking
we-
about.
There's no precedent.
but
There's no precedent.
You know-
We make an accommodation if the same way that the town has made a policy decision to pay a certain amount to replace a post and mailbox. They're not legally required to do that, they've just
I think you're
done.
misunderstanding my point. My point is that Mr. Murphy over here was saying, if we start paying for your repairs in a town's right of way, then we're setting a precedent to, the next person who comes in. What I'm saying is, if you ask me to remove a walkway that's in the town's right of way, I'm gonna turn to you and say, well, then go and ask all of these other people who have, walkways and other things in the town's right of way, because it's not fair to single me out.
Well, except that we wouldn't pay for theirs either.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but what
Right,
I'm
we're
saying
not
is,
looking
if
at-
your
we're not-
corrective
yeah, no,
action
I-
is to ask me to do this.
Right.
No, we're not asking you to do that. I'm talking about, you're talking about a concession. The town's making a concession by letting you keep it, right? And so I have no interest in asking you to take your sidewalk out or anybody else's sidewalk out or any of the rest of it. But I also think if it's in the right of way, the town shouldn't be paying to fix things that are in the right of way.
Okay, but then, if I had this conversation going back December 2nd, when I spoke to Mr. Goulet at my home, and he said, yes, I will take care of repairs, to me, there wasn't a specified cap on that. He said he would take care of it. I didn't know, if I was told at the time, your walkway's in the town's right of way, you should deal with this now, and if you can't deal with it before the winter, I'll take care of the repairs this year, but never again. This could have been brought up sooner. Now I'm learning about this, right? And there's damage again. And now I'm stuck with the damage. So
But what would you have done differently?
what I would have done differently is I would have pointed out at the time that this is in the town's right of way, and then I could have, done something about it before it was damaged again. And I was already told that it would be paid for. I have.
So when we discussed this, I was gonna have my guys come out there and reset your stones and replace those couple ones that were damaged. You didn't want us to do that. You wanted to have your landscaper do it. And
We didn't speak about,
absolutely, I have my highway supervisor will back that up.
we never had a conversation about you doing repair work.
Our guys were coming in and you wanted your landscaper to do it. That's why I asked you to have them give me a quote to see if it would be reasonable to do.
We spoke on December 2nd,
Yeah.
the day that I wrote the letter, you came out to my property. and
With
you
my highway
said-
supervisor.
And you said that when I said, I have a landscaper, if it's damaged,
But
Send
at
you a
first, we
quote.
were going to have our guys come in and do it.
I don't remember that.
Yep, and then you said, well, I'd rather have my landscaper do it.
Regardless, my point
Yeah.
is, I think that's moot, frankly.
Okay.
My point is this. Nobody informed me that my walkway was in a town's right of way. At that moment, it could have, someone, you could have told me, or you could have brought it back to the town could have informed me. I may have been able to take some corrective action. Instead, the response was, send me a quote at the end of the winter if we damage it again, and I will take care of it. That's what I did. I didn't know that taking care of it would mean.
Wait a minute, I think we're a little off track. When we came out to your property, it was already damaged. So when did the town say that if it gets damaged, we would just send us a quote?
There was a little bit of damage. It got further damaged during the winter.
But we came after the winter, and it was already damaged.
No. You came December 2nd. That was the day that I dropped the letter off in the town hall.
When I saw it, it was already damaged.
You may have come out to the street to look at it. I don't know about that.
We didn't come out to your property to look at an undamaged walkway. It was already damaged when we were
Yes,
there.
I know. But what I'm telling you is, there was further damage along the winter. All I'm saying is, this is what's already happened. And at the end of the winter, I would like the town to take care of it. And then you said you would.
It was already damaged at the time, and you had given me a quote for.
No, I didn't give you a quote until April.
Right, but that was for the damage that we came out to see.
It was for damage that continued to happen throughout the winter.
Okay, that was a misunderstanding on my point, because it was already damaged when I went out there.
I'm not saying it wasn't.
Just to be clear, the quote that you first gave Mo was in April.
Yes,
So that was the quote to repair the damage as of the end of the winter.
as of the end of the winter.
So what you saw for a number was, whatever you saw when you first looked at it, it's the price you got for the repair.
Correct.
Was as of the end of the winter, so it was.
Correct.
When the damage occurred almost doesn't matter. That was the thing that was under discussion. Now, in light of what we're talking about here, Mo probably shouldn't have offered to pay for anything because of the legal.
I understand that now.
Yeah.
And if I had understand it before, then I think my corrective action could have been different. And now,
But what would
based
it
on
have
what.
been?
What's that?
What would it have been?
I would have talked to, my landscaper and come up with a solution. But I didn't have any information any basis to have that conversation.
Or what's changed that keeps you from doing that now?
Now, my solution to this, to not have it happen again, because it's very clear to me that you wouldn't pay for this next winter should it happen again, is to, present to my landscaper some of the options that you're talking about, whether it's lowering the grade or putting some grass in there, so ending the paver sooner, so that now if they do bump it, it hits the grass and there's a cushion between that and the paver. I'll let them decide what's the best way. I think, what I would still ask, because I was told that this was gonna be paid for, is to have the town, pay for the cost of whatever that corrective action is.
How much, no, when you offered to pay for it, how much was it gonna be?
The 490.
There was no amount stipulated.
It was
There was
right
no
here.
quote in December.
No, not in December, but the first quote you gave me was for 490.
Well,
The second quote you gave me was for 1226.
so when I submitted the first quote, we didn't know that the border stones were not gonna be available.
Right, but you're still willing to pay the $490?
I'm still willing to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the town should bear the risk of the judgment of the landscaping industry about which
Well,
colors
and
are most
if you're gonna pay anything, my
desirable.
recommendation would be that this is it, this is
Right.
nothing further going forward.
Right, so I don't think any of us is suggesting that whatever Mo offered, we're pulling back. I don't think that's.
My feeling is that.
Legally, I was saying that, but we're getting to the stage about what's reasonable, what's fair.
My feeling is that
Mo
anything
knows
that.
now to not be overly generous in offering money for intrusions on the right of way. I'm around with, I think, if for no other reason than he's an awfully good DPW director, I'm happy to back that 490 number.
Yeah, me too.
There's a couple things. One, Mark, I think whenever anyone is using the right of way, we get to a license that makes clear who's responsible for what.
In other words, hypothetically, you could give him an agreement to allow him to continue to maintain it with the understanding that it's at his risk entirely.
So,
Or you could require him to take it out, which would be the starting point, because what was said earlier is correct. The town has no obligation, and in fact has the right to have things removed.
I think we're doing this because we want to stand behind Mo's offer to do it, but that.
Well,
And I don't want anybody to pull up their walk.
I understand why you think the way, because I thought the same way until this summer when this came up, and I finally understood why my friend on Quarry Road didn't get his mailbox replaced. So you're not like way out in, right field with what you assume. I think you ought to know what your own property lines are and what the rights of way are, so I don't think he's obligated to tell you what your plot lines are. But quite aside from that, I think we're all willing to honor the offer. if you're willing to sign, and I think we're willing to not say you have to take the walk out of the right-of-way entirely.
Oh, absolutely.
Except that we need to clarify that you're accepting responsibility for maintaining your walk going forward. I think if you pulled the walk in a little bit, and you can, a foot might do all you need to do, but what I'm getting at is that I don't even know if that doesn't give you some more border stones that are no longer on the side that could be used for the cross. Not sure, I don't know about that. I don't know if you could use
Yeah,
different.
it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, or if you could just use different colors only for the end. But if that's, if something like that, I understand it's not what you're asking for, but we don't think we should pay what you're asking for, to be honest. To be clear, if that's a reasonable resolution that contributes to whatever you do, I don't even know what the price would be, but it's, you could rework some of the materials just to get it far enough back where this whole problem goes away. But still ask Mo to figure out if there's not some way, if that's where the peak of the pile at the end of your cul-de-sac is sitting right in front of your house at the end of the walk, it'd be kind of nice to figure out how to clock that around 15 degrees so it's in the front yard, but not
We
right
will
on the
do our
walk.
best.
But,
Yeah, I mean, you see, that would be great if you could do your best. I'm not expecting perfection. I wouldn't want their job in a heavy snowstorm trying to figure out where all this snow goes when you have all these, people who don't want this covered and that covered. I get that. I just,
I mean, there may be something creative, your landscaper can come up with some kind of, I don't know, poured apron or something that's a transition.
you do that too, but.
What are we gonna, what are we gonna capture?
The one thing I would like, though, in light of this, is that we have a clear agreement that-
Right.
that you're picking up the responsibility going forward, just so it's not open for debate in the future.
So, just for my own clarification, anybody, and it sounds like, we're not unique, right? I mean, this 6-foot or 8-foot border exists on everybody's property?
Just about.
So when it does, and people have these walkways and other things, if they get damaged, 100% of the time, it is their fault, even if the plow drove over my land.
It's considered a trespass, okay? That's, the initial installation is considered a trespass, and by legal definition, there are no rights that you have because it is a trespass. It's without permission.
And it probably wasn't you who did it, it was right there when you bought the house, right? I mean, it was
Well,
probably
we,
installed by the developer.
we worked with a landscaper to put that plan together,
Yeah.
right? But, and that was a vendor of the builders.
Right.
So
So
I
give the-
had no idea
The
that we could
landscaper
put
maybe
something
doesn't
that
know
was.
enough to go look at the layout plans that are on record. The developer certainly should have been aware of those, because his engineer would have prepared them in the first place.
But front walkways are not uncommon, right? And so what I'm learning is that often they may be in the public right of way.
Correct.
So what I'm just trying to do is get specifics so that I understand, I mean, if a plow came on my property and somehow destroyed, bushes and plantings and all that kind of stuff, and it was within that 6 to 8 foot border, it's my responsibility unless I can prove negligence or something like that?
It's not even negligence, it's your responsibility, and in fact, we have those kinds of variations all the time.
But as a DPW, we feel if we're negligent in any way, that we feel that we're responsible in any way, we try to do what we can to make amends. But we also have to be very careful as we're spending public money to do that. So we cannot dictate what you put in the right of way. If someone puts a $1,000 mailbox in, I cannot just replace it one for one, because what if someone has a $20 mailbox? So do I give them $800 on top, $980 on top of that? So I feel that if we hit a mailbox with our plow, even though we're not required to by our policy, that we would replace it with a standard box and post. And anything other than that, unfortunately, you decide what you put in there. I can't decide that for you. Unless we would tell everybody you can only put a standard box and post in the right of way.
So my friend on Quarry Road, partly the reason he didn't get his mailbox replaced was that, and partly the reason we have that policy is because Postal Service regulations require you to have a mailbox so it's kind of like that's a special situation. And that's kind of how we've tried to set the policy for that.
Okay.
Okay? So if you can, Mark, if you can draft up something that would be a,
Well, you need to come to some agreement what he's gonna do, and then based on that, I can,
And develop a price from that, or use this price here?
well, decide what it is he's going to do, so that we can describe what it is, what you're gonna do, or
yeah, I would
you're
say,
just
I
gonna
would
give
say
him the
that,
money, whatever.
I would say that's the price, because that's what you would commit, you know, that's the early commitment, so I don't want to open it up again. If you want to, you do what you want, that's what we can
Would it be
contribute
easier
to
just to give you a $490 check? And then have you take care of whatever you need to take care of?
Okay.
And the only thing I'd like is before that happens, that we have an agreement.
And you want me to specify what's gonna be done? Is that?
No, just, we just need.
That I'm responsible going forward for,
If your intention is to keep the walk in the public, in the right of way at all, to any extent, we'd like an agreement that basically says, I recognize, essentially it's a license agreement that says, yes, we now acknowledge that you've put this in, but the circumstances are you put it in at your own risk and you're responsible for maintaining it.
And trust me, my guys don't purposely do anything to anybody. And we're sorry that happened, but, you know, again, things do happen in the wintertime. It's easy when you see it in the spring and summer because you can see everything, but we'll do our best to control whatever we can.
I appreciate that. And I would never think that someone would do something intentionally, I mean.
Okay.
So, so that's fine with me if you want to send me a check, and then I can sign that document.
I'll send it to you for review.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
And then-
Appreciate it.
So I have copies of the layout plan. I went to the planning board and got copies of the layout plan. I can send them to you so you have them for your files as
So
well.
I can actually see where it
So you
starts
can
and ends
see where it is.
exactly?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
If nothing else, it was an educational experience, so.
Well, I enjoyed
True.
chatting all
Well-
summer.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks, Maurice.
Thanks.
Okay,
Thank
all
you
right.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Okay.
If we can do, before we get to anything else, if you can take Anna Mae O'Shea, who's been waiting so
Sure.
patiently all evening for her request, which is on the
You're the only,
consent
this is the
calendar.
only item on the consent calendar, so it's
You
almost
weren't
not a
here for the
consent
hospital
calendar.
discussion, just to enjoy it?
Yeah.
warned her.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, Mo.
Thanks, Mo.
I was thinking, maybe I might get one talk earlier.
Well, that, I'm sure that was fun to watch anyway.
Very interesting. So, hello, folks. I'm here on behalf of the Medfield Coalition for Suicide Prevention. September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and we are seeking approval for an art installation at Straw Hat Park. I believe Evelyn sent you a picture of the tent and that.
Should be in your packet. It just came in, I think she just got it
Yes,
today.
yes, it
Yeah.
came in late.
So it's
sorry.
probably in the gray folder.
Oh, that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there multiple or just the?
I
So
think
last
the one.
year, oh yes, perfect, that's it, yeah.
That's-
So last year, I don't know if you folks recall, we did the Eversource polls from about Park Street to Nye Road, and the community gathered. We had groups at Blake Middle School, at the high school, at St. Edward's Rectory. We had a group at the Council on Aging, and folks really throughout the community that knitted those shawls for the polls. And we got a wonderful response from that. I was very pleased, we were all very pleased with the press that we got from just the awareness building, because I think the problem with, I think the power of an art installation is really what we're aiming to do is bring the stigma of suicide to the forefront, because that is the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges is the stigma around it. So with these communities, small communities coming together, we can start breaking down the stigma slowly but surely. So we are thinking about that tent over in Straw Hat Park and installing chicken wire or some wire, and then the community would gather
in various places to crochet either hearts or flowers in the pink and the turquoise. It's very symbolic in terms of little pieces coming together for a bigger cause. So that's really the gist of it.
For the month.
For the month, and we will make sure it's secured, so somebody having their coffee doesn't get whacked. So yes, so it is temporary, and I think it would be very beautiful.
Sounds good to me.
Mr. Chair.
Where is it in the, where will it show up in the Straw Hat Park? Physically, where is it in
We
Straw
were
Hat Park?
thinking over the sidewalk so that people would walk.
So people walk on, okay, so
through
it,
like a tunnel of.
so is it old?
No,
Like
so
a-
that's the inspiration. So I
Okay.
think first you had something from maybe Portugal or Spain, some embroidery thing, and then Diane Horvath and Jean have been inspirational in terms of the ideas. But Diane had seen the Tunnel of Love in Natick, and they've gotten a lot of press. And again, all these little crochet things together, and that's just a sample of one of the photos. That's a
So-
project in Natick right now.
So the chicken wire is on the side,
Yeah.
and then they get filled in,
Yes.
so the
So people can walk under it, and then it'll have.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I just have to indicate on the record that unfortunately as desirable as and attractive as this project is, it unfortunately opens up the possibility of creating a public forum that would preclude you from denying something that you didn't consider to be either as attractive or desirable at some future date. We've been over this, we've had this discussion before, unfortunately. The town's within its rights to say no public exhibits on any public property, no matter who or what or whatever, but once you start to lower that wall, the town's exposed to others coming in and saying, this is now a public forum and we have a right to do this.
Does it make a difference that it's an art installation versus a,
Makes no difference at all.
Even though it is a community-based initiative.
It's a First Amendment issue.
And that you've already done art installation on other town-owned properties?
A pure art installation would be a different story.
so an art installation without a defined purpose?
Right.
Like what was done at the Vine Lake?
So I would move that we permit this as a pure art installation for the month of September.
I have two lawyers, one on this side, one on that side. Two on that side.
Mark is unquestionably correct, and so, you know, the question is to what extent are the trolls gonna come to Medfield, right? So, I'll second it, I think, I think it would be limited to Straw Hat Park, right, Mark?
What?
If we approve this for Straw Hat Park, the argument would be that Straw Hat Park is
That
a
would be
public
the- right,
forum,
right.
nothing else.
Correct.
Right, so at least it's small in terms of the amount of stuff that can go.
That's why last year you ended up with the phone poles, because it was like, that's not
they
the
wanted to do
town's
it-
issue.
They wanted to do it at Town Hall,
I mean, we
right?
currently have
Right.
a memo day banner across the Main Street. I mean, we're open to the same issue there.
That's just an announcement, that's defensible.
Okay, good.
So if it were a pure art installation, does it make a difference? I don't know, do you have any plans for words, or is it pure art?
Pure art, but also QR codes. Which are
This
not
world's
words.
gotten so complicated.
What happens when somebody does that? What kind of a message do they get?
It would be hotline information or facts about suicide prevention.
So it sounds like it's the same as having words.
And you're gonna put that information on the Noshengrad property?
Sorry? Oh,
Telling you what to do.
okay. Can do?
With their permission.
Sure.
You guys are willing to take the flying leap that the First Amendment won't come back to curse us for eons to come on Straw Hat Park? And if Jean is willing to risk the legacy of Straw Hat Park is not becoming a public forum
Unfortunately,
for.
this is a classic area where no good deed goes unpunished. I could spend the rest of the night telling you horror stories, so.
We have a motion?
We already had one.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay, got it.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Okay.
And if we get sued, we'll refer them to the suit.
Sure.
All right.
The law firm of Minio and O'Shea Brook will take the stage.
All
And
right.
that's it, right? Oh, no, we have to do the town administrator goals.
Town administrative goals and also meeting minutes, right? Or,
We have the Board of Health appointments too.
I don't think we have any board of health appointments.
I am prepared on that transfer station.
There's a new, I didn't get that updated one. I didn't get that one.
No, sure, I'm working off the right one.
I didn't have that.
So,
Town administrator goals.
town administrative goals,
Yes, I sent
And-
a final version to everyone this afternoon.
take your word for it.
Sorry.
Was it different?
Seriously? Because I just downloaded all this, well, I did the packet this afternoon.
No, the goals I downloaded separate. 'cause
Oh,
I just
no,
finished
I
making
got
all your
that.
changes
Oh,
that
we
you
were
had
talking about
Thursday
the
night.
agenda.
Oh, I'm
with
sorry.
the additional stuff on the
Yep.
agenda.
No, the agendas Evelyn gave for me to hand out to you? Yes.
So.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Well timed.
There you go. Okay. Gee, it's good to see we stumbled through this meeting without really having the correct agenda, but this is good. So.
I just assumed you had it because we were going along as if.
No, we just make this stuff up. I'm a good tap dancer. Okay, great. You want to, it doesn't matter. Why don't we start with the town administrative goals?
So did everybody have a chance to review? I know Mike had a comment, and I made a change to one of his comments. I don't know if anybody else had a chance
I
The
did.
ones that came this afternoon, I haven't had a chance to look at, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
So do we want to defer it for a meeting or? No, unless you want another copy of it.
No,
have this,
I looked at it today.
Yeah.
Came in a 10-page document.
But they were just the same thing 5 times. Yeah. It was a PDF with
With
5
10 times?
2-page versions of
Oh,
your
so
goals.
it was.
Yeah.
Oh,
Seems to be we're fated to have multiple copies of this.
Just in
I was
case.
wondering, I printed out 10, that's why I didn't look at it closely. It's
Very
like, oh,
goal
10 pages.
oriented.
It's really only 2
Yeah,
pages.
It's only 2 pages. Ah. Okay.
okay.
I didn't have a lot of things, all I did was I went back through my notes, and I think. I'm fine with these goals.
Me too.
We're good.
Excellent.
You're good.
Yep.
Okay, we'll go final. We need to actually vote
You
to,
did vote to accept.
So moved.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right,
Okay,
only
done.
2 years into the, 2 months into the fiscal year too. That's pretty good.
That's good. All right, and then the last issue on the agenda is vote to appoint Holly Rand and Dr. Michael Abernethy
And
to
that's
the
a-
Board of Health.
And that's a typo, it's Robert Abernathy.
Robert
Not Michael.
Abernathy or Abernethy?
Abernathy,
Abernathy.
A-T-H-Y.
I haven't seen any, do we have a,
This will also require a vote to expand the Board of Health to 5 members.
Great.
do we have, so, Pete, do
Dr.
you know?
Abernathy, yes.
I don't know anything about him.
Dr. Abernathy is one of my neighbors. He's a psychiatrist, retired. He went to University of Pennsylvania Medical School. He's from North Carolina originally, and then he came up to Mass General to do his training and just stayed on for 50 years. He's retired. He lives in Dover. One of his children, daughter, I think, lives in town, so they downsized and moved to Medfield. And he's actually serving already. I asked him to serve on the Coalition Against Suicide Prevention. He's doing that. And I asked him, I saw him this weekend, if he'd be on the Board of Health, and he agreed he would.
Great.
Sounds good to me. Okay.
Me too.
Have a motion to accept both of them on the Board of Health. I guess it's accept both of them on the a motion to expand the Board of Health to 5
Yeah.
and appoint Holly Rand.
I'd make it two separate motions. I
Two
do the
separate?
motion to expand first
Okay.
and then do the.
Okay.
I move that we expand the Board of Health to 5 positions.
I second.
All those in favor? Aye.
I move that we appoint Holly Rand and Dr. Robert Abernathy to the Board of Health.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye. I don't know whether, because it's not on the agenda, we can't talk about it, but you may recall I deferred the transfer station appointment. After I get back from my meeting, I realized that Nancy Irwin had reached out to me already, so if we can.
We'll put that on the
we'll put
17th
that on the
agenda.
next one.
Mhm.
Okay, so had I been up to date on my emails, I wouldn't have disrupted us that way. Okay, I guess we do, the only other things, we don't have the other stuff that's normally here. The action item, you guys took care of the action item, so I don't think we have to do anything with that right away. That's good. Town administrator report, anything?
Nothing tonight.
Okay. Selectmen report?
Nope.
So I have one thing, and I actually apologize for ending on this note, because I have a beef. It had to do with the blog post I read this afternoon from you.
I'm gonna gird myself.
Yeah, gird yourself. No, seriously, the issue had to do with the Medfield Youth Outreach in the post that you made. I was getting ready for the meeting, and I pulled up the post. Came in through Concerned Citizens, so I didn't get it directly from you. It came in through Concerned Citizens, and I had a couple reactions to it. One of them was that I think you did more to express opinions in that post than you did at our last meeting. And so my first reaction is, I think as 3 selectmen, we need to have our discussions in this meeting, not back channels, not through public channels. I just don't think that's the way for us to operate. I actually think the blog post was an open meeting violation. And I'm not saying that, suggesting action. I'm just saying in terms of where the line should be drawn, as far as I'm concerned, that was a blatant open meeting violation. I personally objected to it because while the things you said in it were not inaccurate, the stuff you left out is leaving people in the public with a misperception of the issue, and in particular with my position on the issue, which disturbed me greatly. I'm not going to get involved in public, obviously, I don't want to get involved in public debates back and forth, so I did not respond. My rules are I will post things that I have stated in a public meeting and not go beyond that to express opinions. This is an issue that's under deliberation by us. I think it's not appropriate to have done it that way. I want to lay it on the table because my own view is I don't want to see that kind of stuff happen again. That's my opinion as one selectman. But I read it, I was a little stunned by it. I thought it did throw people off. It's okay, we're going to come back to a discussion of the youth outreach and the board and what the scope of the youth outreach is in terms of what they do and don't do. I just don't think that's the place to put the information you had in on that. So
Well, let me start by saying it's not a violation of the open meeting law. Your reading it may be an open meeting law violation. I don't read anything that I see by either one of you online.
My
Specifically avoid
I
things
totally
that
disagree.
you write.
If you take action to make your opinions known out in the public, that is not my responsibility not to read it. It's your
It
responsibility what you
absolutely is
post.
your responsibility to avoid it. It's,
No, absolutely not, especially if you're misrepresenting things.
I don't think there's any misrepresentation.
Well, I do. I absolutely do. And this is the problem with using the public media to express your opinions on an issue that's under deliberation in this committee, this board.
Well, I guess we just have a disagreement on that.
I guess we
then,
do. I guess we do.
But I thought it was an issue that we had actually resolved last June when it was discussed, and I was very surprised to hear it when it was brought up again at our last meeting.
Well, I absolutely don't think we resolved the issue of the clinical services. And the issue that we have right now is to be clear, just for the record, the part that you left out was we did not resolve that issue. We discussed it. We asked Chelsea to go out and identify all of the various resources in town that address social service issues, which she has done. We talked about not wanting to, I talked about not wanting to maintain silos, and that was not resolved. And we talked about the idea that it is no longer enough to only be worried about 18-year-old and younger children, when some of the suicides that have occurred in this town have been from people, young people, who are older than that. That there's a broader need for us to take a look at what the social services are that we address through our town. So the request was to take a look at what we actually need to do to meet the full social services needs of everybody in the town, not just people who are 18 years and younger and who have families with kids who are 18 years and younger. That's where it stands, as I see it. Apparently, I've talked too long.
I think we need to move around.
We've talked too long.
Intermission is over.
So, yeah, I accept that as an act of God saying, you've gone long enough, it's almost 10:30. Pete, you know, you're a good selectman, so I'm being blunt and I'm being serious about this, because
Yeah, no, I
do see
appreciate
this.
that, but
I'm not doing it, you know, because I do feel that my position, although you didn't call me up by name, was misrepresented, not by what you said, but by what you didn't say. And so if you're gonna go that way, then we're gonna have a problem.
I thought this was an issue that had been totally resolved last summer, and I was kind of surprised when it turned out that it had not been. So I was surprised by the discussion that we had. I thought, especially because we did discuss the clinical piece, and I thought that there was an acceptance of the fact that was going to be something going forward that they were continuing to do. They've done it for 40 years. There's a clear need in town for it. Maybe what you're saying is that there's a greater need than just, I mean, from what you just said, it sounds like you're questioning whether the town should be providing services to more people. And I don't know. I mean, I said that I'm willing to have this discussion, but I don't think, part of the problem that's happened is that our youth outreach worker left in the spring, and we still have not filled that position. And part of what Chris was explaining at the last meeting was that we haven't gone forward with that because there's this inchoate discussion about youth outreach, and I didn't realize that I thought we had settled that in June and that we would be going forward as soon as the personnel board figured out the money issue. But apparently that's not the case.
What we did in June is we committed that we were not trying to get rid of a director of youth outreach, that we needed the scope of our social service department in town to be looked at, and we absolutely did not reach an agreement on the clinical services. I doubt seriously that we've been providing clinical services for 40 years, but even if we have been, and I'd be curious to see the records on that, even if we have been, the restrictions on how medical services are provided, clinical medical services are provided, the rules have changed over those 40 years. The exposures that we have if we're running clinical services out of this town are serious. The records keeping and the security of records that we have under HIPAA is a major issue. And I would want to absolutely be assured that we have got all of those bases covered before we even consider clinical services. The fact that they've been going on for 40 years is news to me, it's news to, I think, other people, but it doesn't matter. The problem is the town has significant exposures if we are providing clinical services, as I understand it. And we should not be walking in placidly.
What is your concern in terms of exposure? Are you concerned that we're going to be negligent in terms of the services that we're going to provide, and someone's going to kill themselves and we're going to get sued?
Absolutely. Or
well, we've got insurance for that.
Do we have insurance for that?
Yes, the youth outreach workers both carry personal insurance.
Does the town have insurance?
I don't know. The town has insurance, but I don't know whether that covers it. But that's certainly something that, you know.
So that's a great question. The second question, though, has to do with compliance with HIPAA. What are we doing? Do we have procedures in place? If we're providing clinical services, is there any accreditation, any review whatsoever on this, or do we just go into business for ourselves?
I would imagine that's all covered by the youth outreach.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a suggestion?
Yes.
So, as this item was not on our agenda for tonight, because obviously this is a substantive discussion of this issue. I think what you raised in your selectmen report is obviously fair game. This is on for the 17th, I believe, and so I would suggest that.
That's why you have three selectmen. One of us is always the peacekeeper. I accept that. And again, Pete, this is, I'm serious about the issue, but I'm sorry to bring it up at the end of a meeting, and it's not intended to be a personal attack.
No, that's fine. If you disagree with something, I'm
Obviously,
happy to hear it.
Obviously, I feel strongly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I disagree.
Okay. I think we've run out of entertainment, Gene. This is about as far as we can take it.
Are you sure?
I am. Yeah, I know, it's early, but I think this is it. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thanks, guys.
So Gus, I changed the thing that I
You're watching Medfield TV.